Today on the show, we're going to be chatting with Michael Dexter about a variety of topics, but of course, including bhyve. That plus the latest news is heading your way right now on BSDNow, the place to be, SD. BSDNow, episode 149. The bhyve has been disturbed and a wild Dexter appears. Recorded July 6, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
We're glad to have you guys with us. Sorry, I had to get a Pokemon reference in there for my kids and for myself, and I thought that was really cool. So obviously we have an interview with Michael Dexter coming up in a little bit where we're going to discuss bhyve and all sorts of things. So you're going to want to stick around for that. That's going to be good. But of course, we got a lot of show to get to. Actually, we're doing a double recording this week too, since I'm getting ready to head off to Texas Linux Fest tomorrow morning. And then next week, we're doing some FreeNAS hacking. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But anyway, we have a lot of articles. We had quite a backlog, I noticed, in our show doc here. So you guys keep sending that stuff in. That's good. Yes. We love that. We like having that backlog. So we have lots of things to get to. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the first story here. So first up, we have a NetBSD introduction, which is published over at BSD Mag. And it's always nice to lead off with a new NetBSD article. Yes. So I was a little tickled to see that. And of course, had to lead off with that. So I apologize because I'm not sure I'll be able to pronounce the guy's name. His last name is George. I got that. Siju Omen George. I apologize horribly for horribly butchering that. So anyway, but he's written a really good article for BSD Mag, which provides a really great overview of NetBSD's beginnings and, of course, what it is today. So for those who have not messed around NetBSD, this is definitely a good read. But, of course, you can't start an article about NetBSD without mentioning where the name came from. And this is actually the first I had heard this kind of written down anyway. But the quote here is, the four founders of the NetBSD projects, Chris Dimitriou, Theodorat, Adam Glass, and Charles Henham felt that a more open development model would benefit the project, one centered on portable, clean, and correct code. They aimed to produce a unified multi-platform production-quality BSD-based operating system. The name NetBSD was suggested by Durat based on the importance of growth of networks such as the internet at the time, the distributed and collaborative nature of its development. I actually did not know Theo had come up with that name originally. Is that the first you'd heard of it?
Yeah, I didn't know that that's where the name... I knew why that it was named because of networking, but I didn't know that it was his idea.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a Theoism. That's cool. But anyway, that's cool. So, of course, from there, NetBSD's expanded. That was a long ways back. And, of course, keeping in line with its motto, of course it runs NetBSD, it's now grown to over 57 hardware platforms, which, of course, includes the i32, yay, Alpha, PowerPC, Spark, Raspberry Pi 2, Spark 64, and Zarus, because why not? It basically runs on everything. Of course, all the major players included as well. So don't worry about that.
They got pictures here of a Pocket PC PDA running at BSD.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a toaster running at BSD.
Yeah, that's right. There's definitely some good stuff in there. It's neat to see the old pictures, too. And the toaster, why don't we see more of those? That should be making the rounds at trade shows. I'm just saying. I think that would draw a crowd. Yep. Actually, do you know who owns that? Who has that?
What would be really cool would be to make one where the heat element was some kind of grid, and so you could program what you wanted it to design on the toast.
To appear?
Yes.
That would be very cool.
Or even if it just did the
NetBSD logo
on the toast, that would be awesome.
That would be really stinking cool. Anyway, if somebody does that, please let me know. I think I would geek out over that.
Exactly.
But of course, from there, the article goes into some topics which, if you've been a long-time listener, might be familiar to you. Of course, like package source, their work on SMP and embedded, and of course, virtualization. I think the first one to have Xen support way back in the day. And they, of course, gives you a good overview of what to expect in our modern NetBSD today, especially if you've not run it before. But lastly, in addition to mentioning some of the commercial vendors that are using NetBSD in a variety of ways, including some different point-of-sale systems, routers, and thin clients, you may not have heard about the research teams which actually deploy NetBSD, which I thought would be interesting. So I don't think we've ever discussed that on the show before. But among some of the top 4 listed in the article here, of course, are the NASA Lewis Research Center, which is a satellite networks and architectures branch, uses NetBSD almost exclusively into their investigation of TCP for use in satellite networks. So that's pretty cool. Of course, the CAME project, which is the research group for implementing IPv6, IPsec, and other TCP/IP-related techs into the BSD Unix kernel, of course, all under BSD license. NEC Europe had established a network laboratories in Heidelberg, Germany in 1997 as NEC's 3rd research facility in Europe. And that lab focused on software-oriented research and development for next-generation internet. So I wonder if they do some V6 stuff as well, or what that's related to. And then, of course, lastly, the SAMS-2 project, which is the Space Acceleration Measurement System 2. NASA will be measuring the microgravity environment on the International Space Station using a distributed system consisting of NetBSD. So that's pretty cool to see that our pal NetBSD is being used in some really neat research areas. So yeah, definitely worth your read. If you have some time, go check the show notes, check the link, and give that a whirl, especially if you're not as familiar with the NetBSD platform.
Yeah, they also have a couple other things I mentioned here. There's some point of sales and information kiosks based on NetBSD, different routers and things based on it, stuff universities do, lots of other interesting stuff if you want to go check out that article.
Yeah, definitely some good stuff there. Okay, so Alan, you got this next article here, so tell me about this. I love the title. My condolences, you're now a maintainer of a popular open source project.
Yeah, so this is a talk that was given at WordCamp Europe, which is a WordPress conference, but the concepts are really just about open source in general, and so they apply to everyone. So the presentation kind of covers the basics of how open source is more than just the license that you release the code under, but it's about the community and everybody's involvement in maintaining that and so on. But then it also covers the difference between what it means to be a maintainer versus what it means to be just a contributor. Often in FreeBSD land, a contributor is someone who contributes on a regular basis. But in this particular slide, they consider a contributor as like somebody that does like 1 or 2 pull requests against the GitHub and then is never heard from again. Versus a maintainer is who's someone who constantly works on something.
You call that a drive-by.
Yeah.
Somebody drives by, here's a patch, see ya.
Exactly. Versus, the maintainer are people that imagine like the people that are the owners of individual ports in the FreeBSD ports tree and keep that up to date, or people that are responsible for a certain subsystem like the bootloader or the disk encryption and so on and so on. So it covers that, but then it mostly gets into the reasons why people don't do it. The number one is I'm embarrassed by my code and I don't want other people to see it and laugh at me. It's like that doesn't actually happen. In general, everybody's embarrassed by their code, and the only way to get better is to post it and learn from the advice people give you. Now,
I think we've talked about that before, Alan. How you commit something and it's not good, but somebody's going to get frustrated by it and then fix it the right way.
Yep.
So maybe that's the way you prod people into getting stuff done.
Yeah, and that's one way. But the other one is just I've written code and people looked at it and was like, it's like, you probably didn't know there's this little thing over here that does this better. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And then I learned and rewrote it. The very first bit of C I wrote has been rewritten about 4 times as I've learned more and more from people's advice while looking at it and just concepts I didn't know about. Publishing your project is a great excuse to learn better ways to do things and so on.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the theme with this article, is that it's like one slide will be some reason why you don't want to do it, and then the next slide is a solution to that problem. So the next one they find is that people get discouraged that they can't finish their releases, right? So you finally open source something, and then people keep flooding you with more ideas and feature requests, and then it's like, oh, so I plan to release in October, and then you don't actually get it done until December. And you feel bad about it. It's like, well, don't worry about that so much. In particular, what the person giving the presentation does is time-based schedule. So they release, every 3 months or whatever, with whatever's ready to go, basically, instead of, holding off releasing while they try to finish this one particular feature or whatever.
Sure.
So outside of critical bug fixes, they just have a regular release process and go with it.
And there's value to that too. Provides consistency.
Yeah, it's like OpenBSD does this, right? FreeBSD tries to do it, ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all succeed at that to some degree.
Exactly.
Success.
So then the next one is, being overwhelmed by the issue backlog. If there's many open bug reports, you're just like, I'm never going to be able to fix all these things.
Hey, the best piece of advice I can give you for that is sometimes you just have to be straight up with the person. Like, that's neat. I'm sure that's an issue, but that's something we just don't have the time to look at. So I close bugs like that all the time, where it's like, look, that's 3 weeks of worth of work for one person, and that's not something we can do right now. If you want to, submit a patch.
So
maybe it'll encourage somebody to do it.
Exactly. It's triage. So decide what needs to be done first, what's more important, prioritize, and make decisions. You have to decide what you're going to do. And then the next one, obviously, is very popular, is I'm frustrated when issues turn into flame wars or bike sheds and so on. And it's like, well, part of it is oftentimes it's because a lot of open source communication happens as text. And text doesn't convey the meaning as much. And, it can just depend on your mood when you read the email, whether it seems like the person is being hostile or not, or whether they meant it this way or that way. So their advice here is be empathetic and respectful, but be firm. In the end, sometimes you have to do like Chris says and just decide that that's not really in the timeline for our project, and it's not one of our goals.
Sure.
And then obviously the other one here is I'm overcommitted on my open source involvement, as in doing too much stuff.
I think we're all there. This is a good sign that you're doing it right. What's the last one here, though? I feel alone?
Yes. The other one is, yes. So for overcommitment, this is, make yourself happy first and set clear boundaries. In particular, they mentioned about making sure they don't spend about more than like 5 hours a week working on their project so it doesn't take over their life. As if, hey, Chris.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's like we try to keep the show down to about that much time a week.
Yeah, you have to compartmentalize things. Like right now, I have to purposely emails closed.
Yep.
Like I'll keep track of the chat room where I'm doing you guys while we're doing the show, but everything else got to go away.
Yep.
So I can worry about just this one thing.
Yeah. So for I feel alone, it's like, well, in particular, talking about, sometimes it's fun to be the benevolent dictator, but you get concerned about the project's buzz factor, and especially when it's like, well, my time is limited at the moment. I don't have that much time to work on it. It's like that's when it being an open source project where other people are also involved comes in handy. And
contribute what you do have time-wise. Every little bit helps. If you can fix one issue for somebody, that's just one less thing they have to look at, and they can work on yet another thing. Yeah. So forth, so on. We're not asking everybody to do all the things.
Yeah, they say focus on leadership and welcoming others to participate. I've seen Matt Aarons doing this quite a bit with OpenZFS and changing his role from actually writing all the new features to, building a team of people that will keep ZFS going forward so that he doesn't have to do everything himself.
That's right.
And building up the community around the project, because that's how the project, Kirk McCusick always says, the way you measure the strength of an open source project is, can it survive a change of leadership? Or how many changes of leadership has it survived already?
Sure.
And that's, an important thing.
Okay.
So I found that quite interesting. And so I would say, so there you have it. To go open up your code and share it with people, or find an existing project that you use and are interested in and join it as a maintainer and, help spread the load.
Yeah, if you're a listener here, we're going to push you, go do open source. I mean, even if it's writing docs, if it's translating, if it's just closing tickets or triaging things, there's a lot of things you can do that's not just code. But if you can do code, do that as well.
I guess that's ones we've never mentioned on the list of, things you can do even though you're not a programmer. Is like, for example, FreeBSD has the bug buster team that just goes through, and sometimes it's just a matter of like adding the tags to the ticket, the problem report, saying, this one's about this subsystem, and make sure it's in the right category, and make sure the right people know that the PR exists. or making sure to mail back to the person that submitted the bug and say, hey, we actually need this other bit of information as well in order to help solve this. Or like, you forgot to tell us which version of FreeBSD you were running when you had this problem.
Yeah.
And just little things like that are just, you're
providing value to the project again without ever doing a single line of code. Heck, even just being a decent human being and being interactive on the forums or IRC or mailing lists. I mean, that's of great help. When somebody, I always love it when somebody replies to something before I can get to it, right? And they're like, oh, okay, that one's already been answered. I'll go answer this tough one that nobody knows the answer to because that's something I wrote, but that's always a good thing. Okay, well, I guess we'll move into the next story here. So a little bit of an interesting twist on our normal news stories today. We have an article featuring our very own Alan Jude talking about why FreeBSD and, of course, the advantages on working on an open source project. So this is a little weird, Alan. We don't normally talk much about what you do with scale engine stuff, but I guess we kind of get it a little bit in a roundabout way.
Yeah, so this one was a couple of months ago. This hosting advice website sent an email to the FreeBSD mailing list asking to interview some people about FreeBSD. And after seeing no one replied for quite a few days, I'm like, yeah, sure, we can talk to me then or whatever. And then a couple of weeks later, I did a phone interview with them, and then they whipped that up into this article here and sent it to me, and me and a few other people reviewed it and tweaked it a little bit, and then they've posted it here.
Yeah, no, it's well done. So I got some quotes to read from it here, though, which, is that weird, Alan, having to read quotes? Okay.
But it's less weird that you read it than if I did it, so.
That's true. That is true. So here's the art. Okay, yeah. So first quote here. When Alan started his own company hosting websites for video streaming, FreeBSD was the only operating system he had previously used with other hosts. Based on his experience and comfort with it, he trusted the system with the future of his budding business. A decade later, the former sysadmin went to a conference focused on the open source operating system, where he ran into some of the folks on its documentation team. They inspired me, he told our team in a recent chat. He began writing documentation, but soon wanted to contribute improvements beyond docs. Today, Alan sits as a FreeBSD project committer and core member now. We have to throw that in.
That happened a couple of weeks after the article came out.
I know. So yeah, it's good. It's already out of date. You guys got to update it. But it's rare you get a chance to chat with someone so involved with a massive scale open source project like this. Rare and awesome. So yeah, that's a good first quote there. And of course,
think,
after
one
that,
of my favorite ones is kind of at the beginning there. It's just like, so I made this change and now it's everywhere. It's
right.
like it's on every Netflix box serving, 35% of the internet.
That's scary to think of sometimes. Like, I'm always afraid of that. Like, oh man, I'd hate for my code to be the one that breaks.
to be one of those epic war stories about how the team at Netflix spent like 4 days trying to figure out what was going on, and it turns out it was.
Or my bigger thing is like that was the security vulnerability that got Sony hacked or something, right? And you're like, oh no.
Yeah, because the PlayStation 4 too.
Yeah, that's right.
Luckily, none of my contributions are old enough to be included in the PlayStation 4. Okay. But they're doing a second version of the PlayStation, and I don't know if they're moving that far forward with FreeBSD or sticking with the older one. But
I don't know. If only Sony would come talk to us about that. But I digress. That'll be for a future episode. Maybe they'll do that. But of course, from there, Alan goes into some of the reasons on why FreeBSD. Of course, starting with a code organization being very well maintained and documented. And a quote from that is, the FreeBSD project functions like an extremely well-organized world all its own. Alan explained the environment. There's a documentation page that explains how the file system's laid out, and everything has a place, and it always goes in that place. In addition, then, Alan, of course, gives us some insights into his work to bring boot environments to the loader and other reasons why FreeBSD just makes sense. So in summary, though, I think you wrapped it up quite nicely at the end of the article here. An important takeaway is that you don't have to be a major developer with tons of experience to make a difference in the project, Alan said. And the difference that devs like Alan are making is incredible. If you too want to submit the commit that contributes to the project relied on by millions of web servers, there's plenty of ways to get involved. We're especially talking to sysadmins here. As Alan noted, they are the main users of FreeBSD. Having more sysadmins involved in the actual build of the systems mean we can offer the tools that they're looking for, designed the way a sysadmin would want them designed, not necessarily the way a developer would think makes the most sense. So I think that actually ties in real nicely with the previous article too. So get involved.
I want FreeBSD to be taken over by sysadmins.
There you go. Well, I'm starting to see more and more sysadmin tracks like at BSD Can and conferences and stuff. So that's a good thing. I think we're kind of on the way to seeing that.
but I just think that currently a lot of the role is the sysadmins come to the conference. Basically, the sysadmins consume the features that developers add, but and that's why there's a lot of value in the conferences of getting the sysadmins and the developers to talk, because then when the sysadmins complains, it's like, if only it could do this. The developer's like, oh, I never thought I would need that, but yeah. I would like to see more and more development driven by the needs of the sysadmins. But I can see where that can be a problem. A lot of development that's done by the developers is either because of their day job or because of an itch they're scratching. But a lot of me in particular are interested in making sysadmin lives easier. Partly because I am a sysadmin, so I understand. But I'd like to see just more discussion and ideas on how we could improve that.
Cool. Okay, so our last article in this segment here, you're going to have to tell us, Alan. I guess it's a guide to saving electricity and time with Poudre and bhyve. So how does that work?
So this is basically a how-to kind of describing, if you remember back when we covered Justin's migrating from Solaris to FreeBSD articles, he talked a little bit about how his plan was to run bhyve on his big build machine, compile all the packages, but then migrate it into a bhyve on his slower NAS to save power. And so this is actually a how-to on how to do it. So this article goes over running Poudre to build the packages, in this case actually for a Raspberry Pi, so cross-building the packages, with an interesting twist of running it on both as a bhyve guest and as the bare metal server using Fiber Channel via iSCSI. So firstly, Poudre can build packages for different architectures such as ARM. This can save hours of build time compared to building ports on the ARM device, yes. Considering that it took like 6 hours to build LLVM on using the cross builder on a beefy CPU, I can imagine how many days it would have taken on the Raspberry Pi.
Oh, that'd be horribly painful.
Even just with QEMU without the native cross tools, I had it run on that big machine for 67 hours before I realized I had done it wrong and canceled it. So it would have taken weeks probably on the Raspberry Pi.
There's probably some things you just physically couldn't build on the Pi right now. There's not enough memory.
Well, I think LLVM might be one of those.
Yeah, right. It might be like, I only have a gig of memory. Can't do that. Yeah. Sorry.
And the SD card's not going to be fast enough to swap anything either.
No, not at all.
This is so he says, let's say that a person has an always-on device like a NAS that's running FreeBSD, and that's a lower power machine. But to save power, this device has a CPU with a low clock rate and a low core count. This low clock rate and core count is great for saving power, but terrible for processor-intensive applications like Poudre. Let's say the person also has another physical machine with a fast processor and a high CPU count, but it draws nearly twice the power and the fan noise is just really loud and annoying, right? So to get the best of both worlds, the goal is to build the packages on the fast physical server, then power that off, and then start up that environment in a bhyve on the NAS. So the tutorial walks through setting up a host, which is your always-on host, which is the NAS, and F host, which is the fast but noisy build machine, and setting up a Raspberry Pi. So it includes the instructions on basically creating the ZVol and installing the OS in it. They actually do that in bhyve. And then they export that over iSCSI and boot the fast computer over iSCSI, over the fiber channel, directly from the ZVol. So the fast server is not using its local disk to boot from. It's loading the OS over the network, but not with NFS, with iSCSI. And then they also show you how to boot that in bhyve and then installing Poudre and getting that all set up. So this, configuring the fiber channel and how to do cross builds for Raspberry Pi as well. There's a link to an external tutorial for that. So then you boot up the fast machine over the network. You build all your packages. That takes a couple hours, whatever. And then you can shut that down and then boot that same ZVol as a bhyve on the NAS, and now it can serve those files that way. And then you need so it has everything you need to make this hybrid physical virtual machine that'll run on both pieces of hardware. And then another interesting thing you could do is that the same setup could also work to run the same bhyve on two different machines. because over the iSCSI, you could run bhyve on the second machine. And so while bhyve doesn't yet support live migration, when it does, having that common network storage for the file system is what is going to be one of the important parts of that. So if you imagine you have two of these fast machines and the one NAS, you can boot the bhyve off the one. That machine goes down or gets too busy or whatever. You can just live migrate bhyve to the other one, and it maintains the connection over the network, and the storage is just there. And you don't have to try to move the whole storage, which can be terabytes even, and wouldn't be fast enough to do live.
That's pretty cool.
But yeah. And I thought that was also kind of a great segue into our interview where we're going to talk about bhyve.
That's right. Which we'll be talking about that with Michael here in just a moment. Wow, we need that live migration part. I'm excited. I can think of all these neat things we could do with that. Although this sounds kind of similar to what I do with like our Pujara builders for PCBSD. So we have all these different nodes that are connected to Jenkins, and then when they're done, they sync all their data off to just another lower end desktop that actually serves and keeps all the state, right? So that builds can start and stop on different Jenkins nodes. They can sync to the master and not trample one another, and I don't have to worry about if a node goes down, I don't lose my 42 gigabyte package repo, which happens. I mean, we reimage those somewhat often. So it's a good way to do it. Okay, well, I guess we're going to get to our interview here with Michael Dexter in just a moment. But before we do, it's going to be time to mention the first sponsor this week, which, of course, is going to be DigitalOcean. And, of course, the website for that, digitalocean.com. Come on, you should know that by now. But have you actually gone there and tried setting it up yet? If you do, you need to use that coupon code FREEBSDNow, which is going to give you that $10 credit, which is good for running basically 2 months of their lower-end VM, which for a low-end VM still kicks a lot of butt because we're talking SSD-backed, terabyte of transfer a month, access to all the nice control panels and UI utilities they have in their HTML5 interface. I mean, it is pretty slick. And that you can spin these up programmatically and tear them down programmatically all in under a minute is pretty stinking cool. And, of course, that they support FreeBSD is even better. So I like that.
I need to get back to them and see what the status of their working on a ZFS-based image.
Yeah. That's right. I'd like to see that as a one-click. I imagine you'll probably need one of the higher-end VMs, maybe, so you have a little more RAM for it.
But,
I mean, if it's tuned down, it could still work. But you might want just maybe they'll have a recommended thing like you probably want this one if you're going to do ZFS or higher. But still, good stuff. And of course, they have data centers all around the world.
Toronto, San Francisco, New York, London, Amsterdam, Singapore, Frankfurt, and now Bangalore.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay. So pick one close to you, run the speed test off their website to see, of course, which one is closest to you ping-wise. I mean, sometimes that's a little funny, depending on how your route to your ISP goes and stuff. It may not be the one you first expected, but
I know,
give it a whirl.
A user in Norway reported that I think it was the one in Frankfurt had a better ping than the one in Amsterdam from their house because of their ISP.
Oh, yeah, that's what happens. So anyway, of course, check it out. And if you talk to anyone over there, tell them you heard about it here on BSD Now. We'd appreciate that. Okay, we're joined today by the Rollo Dexter himself, Michael Dexter, who's been a longtime friend of the show. And I mean, if you've hung out at conferences anytime in the last, I don't know how many years, Michael, you've probably run into him in person. So first of all, thanks for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to come on today.
Thanks for having me.
So since this is your first time really officially on the show, even though we see you and talk to you all the time, you have to give our listeners a little bit of background. So how did you first get involved in BSD?
Okay, so it started as absolute dumb luck circumstance. About 2 miles from here at college, I sat down in CS 101, and there was a BSD 4.3 system, I'm told in retrospect. And it was hundreds of users working on a Sun-based system, and everything worked. Hundreds of users were checking their mail on IRC, on news, net news, and you name it. And I knew I wanted that. Coming from Hollywood, it's like, that's behind the facade. That's how the computer works. And I thought, great, but I do not want it in a basement of a CS lab. So I started a quest from there. I can go into depth on that, and I've got some artifacts here if you like.
Yeah, show us artifacts. Why not?
So from there, I explored just about every Unix available, and PC Unix especially. And the late 90s mid 90s were very much a dark ages for all that. I'm very, very grateful that I started about 7 months before the announcement of Linux. And back then it was classic Unix. There was HBUX, AIX, DEC OSF, there was Sun OS, and it was a very simple era where it was AT&T style versus perhaps BSD style, and that meant several things. I found my old System 5 CD back when CDs. Nice. I found a really old CSRG archives.
Okay.
But the first useful system was Mark Williams' Coherent. I think it was MWC or something, Coherent. It was a simple Unix clone, possibly just based on BSD, but that I'd have to look back, and I think they've recently opened up the sources to that, and you can, or at least finally download it after all these years. Mm-hmm. A college buddy found a 386 in the street. It needed a new drive, and we got that as a really primitive Unix machine, but it was a bit limited.
Sure.
I later got excited about things like Unixware, and I still have the SDK, though I think I've never quite included that. But it was obvious, here's the future. It's packaged, PC-oriented Unix with all the things. But as you're kind of coughing there, it's like, yeah, not quite. And then lawsuits and more lawsuits.
Yes.
So somehow Portland is a...
I liked
Red
Open
Hat
Server
town.
better than Unix. Just saying.
Oh, totally. So this is a Red Hat town. There's like Linus Torvalds whizzing by in front of my house. And Red Hat 5.1 wasn't there yet. The docs didn't match the software. I was like, come on, guys. But eventually came 5.2. And I thought, hallelujah, a scrappy little Unix clone with a packaged base, with a nice etc directory that fits in one page of the terminal, with, you hit tab, look at all the different commands, and learn them as best you can. And this was the weirdest artifact that came with that. It was like, first off, Grandpa, what's a mouse pad? Fine. And Grandpa, what's Red Hat? Well, that's established. But Grandpa, what's a retail bookstore?
That's true.
That came as a set. And I thought, wow, that's good enough. That's what I've been looking for. The Pentium 2s of the day were pretty good machines compared to the disastrous PCs before that. But then a funny thing happened. Along came Red Hat 6, and they went from like XFCE or whatever, no, not XFCE, the primitive window manager to this beta of GNOME. And it went from a great little scrappy Unix machine to a stunningly crappy Windows clone. Just overnight. It's like, wow, with all the GNOME packages, it just bloated in size. Mm-hmm. They hadn't yet released up to date the online updating, so that was still frustrating. Now that things are bloated, updating it was a nightmare. And of course, package hell.
Sure.
So my interest in these different OSs on my limited budget of limited hardware, combined with an awareness that things can be better, has pretty much driven me on a quest for quite a while now. And I'd argue things are starting to come together finally after many toiling years. Continuing from there, I worked briefly at Mandrakesoft. They had an office here in Portland, and the internal IT team was designed to be hired out. And I was like, wow, but French politics are a bit strange, so that didn't last long. And I just dropped everything and moved to Latvia. I started from scratch and thought, okay, RPM hell, that's a problem. Let's see what's out there. Mm-hmm. In the good old CD-ROM days, I always saw in the catalog there the BSDs, but I knew it was better, but just never really had either a mentor to help me out. And around here I did have mentors, and that certainly helped. I encourage everyone to pursue a mentor of some form. And I eventually came across FreeBSD Jail. I thought, great, hallelujah. So that was around FreeBSD 4.7, 4.8, and I thought, okay, that at least takes care of the RPM hell, package hell, where I remember running LinuxConf under this Red Hat 5.2, and I wanted to change the IP address. Here's how I'll learn it. I'll do it with the GUI, the little console thing, and then look at the etc directory. It touches like 10 files. I'm like, that can't be right. I know that it just modifies one little ATH something or other file, and that's it. But no, they just did their thing. So when I realized applications just litter themselves all over the file system, there is no way getting around just a nice, clean jail of some form. Mm-hmm. So I thought, great, and wow, they announced let's see, FreeBSD 5 with the jail commands, the management commands. There's JLS and JExec and all the things you're missing because you had to do all these tricks to like make things happen in a jail. I thought, this is great. But as we all know, FreeBSD 5 was not a great piece of software. It brought revolutionary changes, the entire layered geom file system thing. And it was not very reliable. And I was trying to partition up things with like direct disk images representing var and user and all that, and then assembling them. And I still have a script up at multiplicity.bsdlv, and it would just blow up on me consistently. And I thought, wow, we've got no platform portability and unreliability. Basically Unix hell, despite the promise of it. So like all of these systems, I thought, okay, I'll get back to you. I then, just out of sheer need, moved on to OpenBSD, which has been pretty darn reliable forever. And I thought, well, that's great, but I need a jail. I've kind of well established the fact that there is a jail, and the timing was good in that I met Kristaps Johnsons. And I think he's been on the show, and he's famous for Mandoc and among other things, which I'll touch on. But we had that conversation at length, that and perhaps a replicating file system and various things. But he being a very, very, very smart person, he thought, well, wait a minute. They have systrace. And what's it do? It intercepts calls and makes a decision. What if we use that device to intercept system calls and filter them between virtual machines? And it wasn't long before I had a prototype of what became sysjail. And wow, as you probably know from your guests, OpenBSD is very particular about just about everything. And you want to be unobtrusive. You want to just lightly touch the system or have an enormous value like Mandoc, which threw out graph. So sysjail, in fact, was just a package that would leverage the systrace kernel resource. And hallelujah, great. But at that exact same time, Robert Watson, who was very active at, say, EuroBSDCon, would say, you know, I've been meaning to write a paper on the shortcomings of that. And to make a long story short, you can look at the Watson Woot, W-O-O-T paper. Those two words should bring it up. And he basically pointed out a concurrency issue where if you restrict a process and it forks a child process, the child process can essentially rearm and defeat the value of any containment, etc. So people found it very useful for, say, packaging up OpenBSD, just like the original chroot under AT&T Unix. And so, okay, continuing our conversations, that led to the Malt project, which is a pluralized Unix kernel. We used NetBSD because it was simple and clean at the time and fast. Still is, but things would be very different had we gone a different route with a different OS, perhaps. But Malt took the kernel lower half, doing drivers and all that, didn't touch it, upper half where init begins life, and pluralized it. So you could have init bring up multiple top halves of the kernel, and they are so equal that one could kill the first one, the default one that started, and continue on. And it was pretty much a research project. He was working at the Baltic Grid project in Riga, and it keeps coming up. It's an idea that won't die. I've still got the source code kicking around somewhere and some VM images. So we'll see what comes of that. But in Riga, you may have heard of the Mikrotik boards, various multi-platform small routers. And I thought, we need a BSD on that. They were so crisp, but they were pretty spendy, and the market needs more choices. So I looked at putting BSD on those. And the killer was the lack of a NAND flash driver. And there was a specific board. I could probably even get the licensing rights to manufacture it if I came up with some money. And I thought, okay, well, let's talk to various developers about NAND software. And then I thought, oh, that's a lot of money. I'll have to raise money for it. And then I found myself in the business of raising money for BSD projects. And that was involved with Linux Fund, BSD Fund, credit cards, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And an amazing money machine surrounding the PCC compiler. It was like, wow, people believed in this, and it was amazing. But then the 2008 financial crisis just blew that whole idea off the map. So that was that. I returned to the U.S., and found myself still involved in the foundations environment. I thought, wow, open source software and public benefit nonprofits are just like the convergence of the things I care about. And so I spent a good 3 years of my life exploring European stitchings and in the Netherlands and cross-border nonprofit things and American 501c3s and Canadian nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's still a part of everything I do, but not my focus. I've sort of from there gone a little more practical and just, well, I'm sure we'll touch on what I'm currently doing, but
Sure. Actually,
that brought me to where I'm at. But it's been a great many educational things.
Yeah, quite a journey.
So you've mostly answered the question, but I think there's probably a couple things we missed. So what are some of the other projects you've been involved with over the course of all of that?
Specific questions would be best because, wow, it's like at Linux Fun, I was looking for projects to just prove this model with. And one exciting one was the OGD1. It was a 17-layer, I believe, graphics card that originally came out of a radar tower display. It was two-headed and FPGA based. And I had bumped into that at Linux Tag in Berlin and thought, wow, here's the design, here's the project. They never got it built, and I raised the money to get it built. I still have a bunch in the basement because PCI-X isn't very exciting in this era. And that's insanely complex compared to the modern Raspberry Pi or anything. So it was a pretty pioneering open hardware project. So I'm pretty excited that my Linux Fun experience got me all over the map just to build this up. I was like, I'm the BSD guy kind of spinning other plates and fanning fires to get it going. But historically, that was fun. Maybe bumped into some in in a search, and you can ask me about those. But all sorts of things, and I've tried to focus on things that I believe are needed. Sometimes it's me all alone. Sometimes it's other people agree that there is a need. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, speaking of it,
Let me know if any jump out.
Well, there's definitely a big one we got to talk to you about. So the thing most often you're associated with when we mention your name is, of course, bhyve. So tell us how bhyve got started and how you became user number 0.
Okay, so we have RPM held to thank, and the rest is just logical conclusions moving forward almost 2 decades. So bhyve, let's see. A key point there was that with Malt, Kristaps realized, wait, NetBSD has Zen. We could just point at the right drivers and boot Malt under Zen. I'm like, you're right. So I'm pragmatic. I grabbed the nearest Linux thinking that must have the best Zen support. I tried spinning up several distros. Not one of them worked. I tried NetBSD, and the documentation was horrible. The docs of mine are still on multiplicity.bsd.lv. And so I thought, wow, Zen is stable. Zen is complex. It is unique. It has limitations, but wow, it never let me down. And fast forward to 2010 Meet BSD. Chris, were you there?
I believe so.
It was back with the true unconference format. And you're supposed to break up into groups. Well, we broke that rule and all got in a giant circle. And there's a picture with James wrangling, and you can see my bright pink shirt and Neil Natu in the corner and all that. And we had a virtualization open discussion.
Yeah, I remember that.
Apparently people agree that we do need these things as a general concept. And we ran through Zen, which, wow, we've had the promise of FreeBSD and OpenBSD guests on Amazon. And only recently has that truly been institutionalized. And everyone knew that the licensing of Zen would not be appropriate, plus the sheer complexity where it's a kernel and a reserved memory space and stuff and more stuff and VTD and countless stuff. So the conclusion was we need a hypervisor. And that's really easy to say. Those words are, hey, great. And so you may not have noticed that the next day, fortunately a 2-day unconference, and that's the beauty of the unconference format, things percolate in the mind. And upstairs in that little room crammed in there, I mean, there's Juniper and IX Systems and all these folks and NetApp just all just having a powwow, and people like, I think, Sean Bruno, and you name it. And we further discussed the need and the potential and all that. And then silence, lots of silence. But out of almost accident, I found myself in the 2011 BSD CAN Dev Summit. I think it was one of those points where I didn't know you have to register, so I just kind of showed up. And that's how
That still happens, I think.
tutorials went in Milan, and it's like, oh, you're supposed to pay a bunch. Sorry. And then Peter Green and Neil Natu had a presentation on bhyve with a horrible camel case, and it's like, oh, hello. Why didn't you tell us more? That's actually the right way to do it. It's a formal presentation. Great. And how exciting. And I immediately latched onto that, thinking, okay, I'm ready. Great, bring it on. And they worked for a large vendor that, for example, would acquire software, and you can either port software for 6 to 12 months, or you can plop it on a hypervisor and have it within maybe days or weeks. So that vendor had its motivations, and it arrived perfectly meeting the needs of that vendor. But unfortunately, those needs were not really in line with the community. It had like all kinds of hard provisioning and limited features, etc. You're probably well familiar with that. So several months later, I was quite literally like, hey, guys, that sounded cool. Can I try it? And one thing led to another. And so back then, FreeBSD itself was severely lacking small but important bits to be a VM on its own OS. So serial issues, virt.io driver issues. And so I had to, and you script something if you have to repeat it. So I scripted up building the OS with these little changes and massaging it, doing whatever. And that, fortunately, was exactly what I was doing with jails back in the day. I pictured that being, a jail should be not unlike a modern container where you have just the bare minimum software. You use LDD to see what it depends on. You build it as appropriate and have it purpose built. And you cannot have a vulnerability with software that's not installed. So from there, one thing led to another, and I just continually scripted that as best I could, and pretty much broke the story of, hey, here's bhyve, here's how you can try it. Yes, it's limiting stuff, but it's limited in some of its features. But I then proceeded to go around to conferences and tell people, hey, you have a hypervisor, go check it out. It's pretty cool. And being, developers are like, well, the virt.io is slow and that's useless. Oh, come on. So a little, think ahead. So I've persevered with that, and I've seen it crash probably more than anyone on the outside world. The developers have, someone's got it. The developers have their hardware, and I've got my hardware, and you've got your hardware. And Alan, you've been great about loaning hardware when new things come along, because, the effort was largely volunteer after it met the needs of the original vendor. So have you tried this? Bang. Have you tried booting to an iSCSI share? Bang. Have you tried this and that? So
You've bled on all the sharp edges, basically.
I've bled on all the sharp edges.
Yes.
I'm to say I did one thing for the project. It was to get it into FreeBSD 10 rather than 11 or 12. And looking back at that pace, it could easily be 12 just because, well, it's their volunteer time, and it just takes someone stupid enough to jump in and just break it repeatedly and build world for days on end. And, remember like FreeBSD 8 style packages with base sets and little floppy size chunks and all this nonsense, and all this stuff is finally going away. So,
creepy chills there.
Exactly. And trying to fetch those remotely to reassemble them into a VM just because, hey, let's test it with this version of upstream, blah, 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 blah. So it took the efforts of a great many people. You two have been extremely helpful. Devin Teskey's been very helpful. And just to get all these little things all aligned to make this work, because they're not complex. Like FreeBSD was the one OS that would not check for a serial interface if it didn't have video. It's like, come on, guys, that's what happens on routers and things. Just please do that right. And they finally do.
We needed better sane defaults in a lot of cases.
Exactly. And virt.io, it's like, that was new territory. Well, whose responsibility is it? And I just got this week a question. Well, who's maintaining that? I don't know. But then there are people like, John Baldwin who would just jump in and say, oh, here's 386 support. Here's 32-bit support. Like, what? Whoa, dude, thank you. That's cool. Right. And just little fixes, because obviously they're using it. Kirk is using it. I was hoping years ago that Robert Watson would come on in his silver steed and say, okay, we have a hypervisor, go forth and institutionalize it and make it great. Well, that doesn't work like that way in free software. So it's bhyve is becoming very, very useful. And late last night, Alan, you pointed out that a port has just landed for the modern firmware to boot, say, graphical Windows and other things, and the port needed some help. If I don't get to the point later, I'll get to it right now. Everyone, ask questions. Don't be shy. Ask a question to the developer. Ask if something's alive. Ask what needs to be done. And you will save an enormous amount of heartache on everyone's part just by asking simple questions.
Sure.
Hey, Michael, is VMRC dead? It's like, ask the question. Don't go rattling off on a chat room about whatever, because I'll tell you exactly what's wrong and why it's not yet public. And no UEFI software is not vaporware.
No, it's in head.
And yeah, it's been educational.
Yeah, I think part of it is that
it's not going away,
especially with open source software, the only thing the developer is getting back out of it is knowing other people are using it. And so just being like, hey, I'm using this, and this is it's about how you feed the motivation of the developer to keep working on it. So I think it's like Michael's saying, you have to ask questions and have to say, hey, how can I help? And that's how things get done.
It's a little more complex in that there's the implied thank you. So, implied thank you for all your work, and here's the flaming fire for what's not working. It's like, okay, just try to balance the complaints with the occasional thank you. And I get this, I see a perception that developers are holding out with the secret repo that has all the things, and they're cashing in on it, and they're holding out on the community. And that's not true. It's actually just their volunteer time. For me, it's been like 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. when the kids are asleep, when I'm lucky and in the mood and have the energy, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And MySQL did that. They had a private repo and they hit people over the head for money for it and had a community version. But no, in this stuff, it's actually not like that. It's what you see is what you get, to a fault. So I have a few opinions on that, but it's been educational. It's been very educational.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, I guess your presentation actually at BSDCan 2012 was the very first talk of the first day of my first conference, and it was, oh look, here's this bhyve thing. In order to use it, you have to reboot with half your memory blocked off so it's not used by the operating system, so you can use it in bhyve and so on. But it was interesting enough and it was, the first thing I'd ever seen. I was like, wow, that's some really interesting stuff those people are doing. I want to try it out. And I started playing with it. And eventually that meant, it's like when I got home, it's like, well, I have this brand new server. Let's see what it does on that. It's like, well, it has 24 cores and bhyve breaks if you give it more than 16. It's like, whoops. And a bunch of things like that.
I don't have a 24-core machine. Developer doesn't have one. It takes people doing things like that. Exactly that.
I remember when we first had to download the script from you somewhere. Wasn't even included, right? The startup script at that point.
It was all my primitive, funky scripts. Yeah, and at callfortesting.org.
Yeah.
So, Alan, there was a little more going on there. I wore my Marseille shirt, partly to remember Paul. And so at the Dev Summit in Marseille, I'm pretty sure Robert Watson was talking about, well, in the modern era at the university, we deploy a new machine as a virtual machine. We don't go through the next install. We just splat down a VM. And to do that right, we'd need a CDN and blah, 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 blah. So I didn't know or care what a CDN was, but at one of these conferences, you mentioned that you do a CDN. I'm like, okay, cool. And it got filed somewhere. And then I think as we confirmed last night, it was in Tokyo. I'm like, you're that CDN guy, right? Go just tell them about GDNS and stuff. Yep. And you're like, okay. And it's just these little tiny things that all need to hopefully eventually happen, because it's all obvious what needs to happen, but just actually getting the right person at the right time with the right resource and the right motivation is tricky. It's really tricky. So
true.
I'm very glad with what both of you have been doing in the in the community. You may remember my presentations in VI simply because running Xorg or anything useful on head was a nightmare. So I'm like VI paging down. Like, Chris, what if you had snapshots of your current PCBSD, like 11 head? That would be really useful. And thank you very much for making that happen. So finally,
that's actually kind of popular too.
Excellent. Yeah. And people have to test it. That's exactly. I mean, 11's coming up. It's a pretty impressive piece of software, but everyone test the hell out of it, please.
Especially this month, because we have all the new Xorg bits that went in. So like Broadwell started working on my Carbon now.
Okay, excellent.
I have accelerated video on my X1 Carbon, which is finally.
And even this last month, and the FreeNAS folks who are now finally jumping on bhyve, they're like, well, there are issues over 16 CPUs and falling down and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you look at my original FAQ that's still living to this day on the wiki, it says things to try, high CPU count. It's like you can write it there, but I don't know how to get, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So that's like, what more can I do? I don't have that nifty big machine with all the CPUs. Please, you can beg, I guess. So anyway,
sure.
It's fortunately coming together after the hard work of a great many people.
So speaking of coming together, can you give us any hints as to what's coming right now or what's being worked on for future bhyve?
What's next?
So everyone was nervous that the UEFI GOP graphics stuff that makes Windows really easy for people would not make it into 11. Mm-hmm. And poor Glenn Barber was in this position to either be the bad guy or the saint. And fortunately, he was very much in favor of that happening. So he helped guarantee that happened. And we've all been encouraging the various developers, Peter notably, to just wrap up some things, which is back to that circle of, well, test it so you can commit it and test it. But if it's not easy to get at, it's not easy to test. So fortunately, 11 will have the majority of the promised things, and that's huge. If you look at the wiki, I've been pretty good about updating things that are relatively low-hanging fruit. Things like USB pass-through, as we talked about at bhyvecon in Tokyo, I believe 2 years ago. Rick Flöta is like, well, we make the money on OpenBSD, we count it on Windows. So the bookkeeping software has the USB dongle, and we'd like to virtualize the Windows, but we need to do the dongle and all that stuff. So that one, Peter feels he could blast out pretty quickly. There are some GSOC projects, and I love how they mesh with the original OpenBSD VMM announcement of the things that bhyve is not interested in. No, we are actually interested in that, and we should see some actually some good things are coming out of the FreeNAS effort. The things like an emulated network card, simply so that users don't have to mess around with VirtIO on Windows. So we should see, I think, an E1000 card show up.
Yep. Nice.
And there was talk of the disk emulation, but that's not too exciting to people now that we have AHCI. But maybe that's important for truly legacy operating systems, so we'll see.
How about graphics pass-through? Is anybody working on that? I have a second card I want to pass through.
Well, one can pass through their graphics card and do stuff with it, as Benjamin would prove with, say, NVIDIA K cards, and he would use it for RDP acceleration. So on some level, yes, but all the nifty BIOS initialization. First, I've been telling people for years now, just try it. Give us the output. Just show us how it
broke.
We
have feedback in this week's
try
episode,
it.
by the way.
I'm not a gamer. I'm not too motivated. And the majority of my machines are laptops because I'm always on the road. So I can't really pass through much stuff and try that. And I don't have a fancy graphics card, all that. So I should almost check the wiki. Okay, way in the future, live migration. What that looks like, I don't know. I would like to see suspend and resume, or more importantly, hibernate. So you just hibernate the thing on your ZVol and send a snapshot, spin it right up. That could take a few seconds. And a poor man's hibernation, and a great many people will be satisfied with it.
That's a feature that base FreeBSD could use just for your laptop, so that you could hibernate it and then open it and have your state back. And
so FreeBSD 11 has Zen, and my scripts, VMRC, which I was hoping to get back on GitHub late last night. I added live CD support for SmartOS, and then, of course, no host bridge support, and all these weird little edge case tweaky things you have to do to get what's fundamentally a simple issue working. So Zen has live migration of some form. Would love to spend more time with that. I encourage all of you to spend more time with that. I know there are very happy Zen users out there, and I get the sense that the Zen community are largely Unix people. They are Zen people. They're not necessarily GNU Linux people. So Zen on FreeBSD with proper ZFS, Latvian pronunciation, is not a bad thing. No, they're your friends. So please jump on Zen on FreeBSD.
Yeah, at FOSDEM in January or February, Reuter actually demoed Zen on FreeBSD 11, live migration between machines, pausing the virtual machine and taking a ZFS snapshot of the ZVol and the memory dump of it, and then resuming the machine in like less than a second. So just, and all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, there's all that to be excited about as well.
This, exactly. GSOC Vagrant is coming along nicely just this last week. It's actually been useful. Please go test that if you're a Vagrant person.
Yeah,
there is live backing support for that.
Steve Wills and Will Andrews working on with the student on that.
Yes, and I'm officially a second on that in case things go weird, but they've been doing great, so I'm happy. And things like it would be, one thing about virtualization, it comes down to a block device and arguably a directory like a jail, or now, as you saw my article, thank you for pointing that out, a diskless boot, and a RAM allocation, maybe some network stuff. And that's the majority of virtualization. So things like having a QCOW backend, granted we have ZFS, which provides a whole lot of great things, but people want that. They want to aim bhyve out of VMDK, and you can convert them. That's not too tricky, although it would be nice to have a BSD license tool to do that effortlessly, seamlessly, you name it. But that's not brain surgery from a development perspective. A block device is like a long string of blocks all in the right order. Sometimes they're chunked, sometimes they're compressed, deduped, whatever. But the basics are really basic. And one challenge through all of this virtualization work has been that hypervisors are extremely complex, by contrast, despite the relationship of those two. And there are very few people on the planet who can work on them. So things like nested VTX sounds great. It's easy to say. And I know Peter's definitely interested in doing that. Feel free to ask Mike Larkin how things are going, because he says he found the code and maybe he's willing to share it. I think I've actually got a wager running on that. But there are countless ways to help, and speeding up VirtIO in every which way and just making it easier. And yes, so my hope in all this was to allow 1,000 flowers to bloom. And okay, a few things have shown up on GitHub, but I will keep pushing on my project, and I keep hearing about others being rewritten and such. And okay, that's fine. But I think in the near term, it's actually pretty exciting what FreeNAS 10 is doing with virtualization. There's a blog post on the forum about how to do that at the command line. They've apparently got the graphical VNC included, and maybe that will be the easiest way to try bhyve. I'm all for that. Great, it's hyperconvergence. Wow, we're buzzword compliant now.
Yeah, someday we'll have a BSD appliance, kind of like Proxmox or something, where it's, FreeHive or something.
Right. It'll happen.
Yep. So changing subject a little bit, tell us about your diskctl project and how that started.
Right. diskctl, that came out of a tweet, of course. I've been trying to make sense of things on at least FreeBSD. Cam control, I believe, can allow you to throw raw CCB commands at a disk and get a giant, ugly hexadecimal response. And if you use a disk, you want to be able to retrieve smart information. You do. And even if it's like, here's a stack of disks. Oh, these, some are new, some are old, some are like 3 years old. It's really helpful to know that the hours count on them, because maybe one was the spare on the shelf, one's been in production, one's a spare, one has 4 hours used, one has, yesterday I saw a disk 41,000 hours or something crazy like that. It's like 4 years or more. You need to know. That's not like a super profound statement. And so with, given that FreeBSD has really good ZFS support, it's pretty important to get that information. And so, I mean, I keep getting accused by a certain CTO about crazy ideas, but I don't think that's a crazy notion. So I want that in base. And people generally agree that we want that in base. And surprisingly, NetBSD came up with its own, I believe, is it a similar disk-CTL or ATA-CTL, I think? And it will provide basic smart dump. And great, OpenBSD picked that up, and there's a Portlander, this guy, Rod Grimes, and I've been talking to him at local BSD pizza nights for about a year now, and I showed it to him, and he's like, they're not even checking if the disk supports smart before throwing a smart command out. It's like, oh, God. So basically, I then looked at everything I could. Obviously, Smart Mon Tools is GPL licensed. That will not be in base, even more so at the moment. And so like the hypervisor back in 2010, it's like, well, we all agree we need this, but who's doing what? So from Twitter, I'm like, hey, yo, OpenBSD peeps, who's working on ATA-CTL? Like, oh, talk to David Gwinney in Australia. I'm like, hey, man, what's going on? Can we reformat the output so that it's like, yes, it splats back smart raw data. Can we just format that differently? And because it's tiny, it's like a little page of information. It's really not complex. And so he did a really quick prototype of like, well, here's absolutely raw, here is slightly formatted, and on and on.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, what would this look like? And I just, based on my experience with ZFS and all these other tools, I started just mapping it out as best I could. And I submitted a paper to Asia BSDCon and later BSDCan. And that's how I think it could work. If you do, say, zpool status, well, what if it just also just from a library included a little smart status? And
Sure.
Fortunately, Rod has been doing low-level disk recovery for a long time, and he knows stuff that a great many other people don't know. So looking at that, he's been a wealth of information. Things, if you think smart pass fail is catastrophic. There's no going back past fail. I didn't fully realize that. So you do have to read the tea leaves and the other information. Of course, that information varies between vendors. They format hours differently in different time formats and other nonsense. And so it's surprisingly complex. So I did what I do best. I just scoured for information. I just found out everything out there. And I created a Google Doc, shared it with David Gwinney, shared it later with others, and said, hey, here's what I know. What am I missing? Because ATA is such a niche that I think it's CCB's command control block thing. That's not even defined. It's assumed that everyone knows that just because, well, the disk people do the disk thing and the rest of us are just at their mercy. Well, that's not how it should be. So I do think that there is hope in that we care about modern disks over, let's say, a terabyte. So we don't have to worry about generations of 300 meg, whatever, primitive disks. And just recently, to their credit, SmartMon Tools got NVMe support. So that's cool because it was lacking that. It's like, well, we need to ask the device. So that's cool. Everyone, please work in a clean room. Don't steal from them. Just get some specs, pound your vendors for specs. But I think I haven't talked to Rod since he got back from BSDCan. Long story about that. So I don't know where that'll head, but I know people are interested. I know the folks at Gandhi were interested. Of course, people at like Netflix and such, they go through a lot of disks. They burn them up. They've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we'll just call it a smart utility, because that makes sense. Just type smart device and get stuff out. But a key point is that if you've read the paper or looked at, I guess I don't have much on the web yet, but the output. Well, I parse stuff all the time. In all this scripting, I parse constantly. So I just want shell variables. And Alan, you want what? JSON or YAML?
Shell variables is good, but JSON can also be useful, yeah. But specifically machine-readable output, like that's the biggest problem with smart CTL is the output is barely human-readable. Like it's not even formatted nice for a person, let alone for a script. It's impossible.
Let alone a machine.
That's true.
No, that's exactly it. We've all been through there, coming up with some regex to try and scrape out the variables, and hopefully they're the right ones.
I just wanted the bloody serial number of the disk.
Exactly. So it's
You asked too much.
the basics are very basic. So I'll sit down with Rod, come see if we can do a little prototype that, what would it look like from a library perspective, from a framework perspective. So it's pluggable for output. It's pluggable for device, be it a SCSI device, be it an NVMe card, be it whatever's up next, NVDIMM, who knows? So what you see is what you get. It's a proof of concept from a man page at this point, and
Sure.
join
So
in.
that's actually the next question. How would somebody get involved with that? What are you guys looking for?
Drop me a line. The knowledge is valuable. If you've been bit banging NVMe cards, we can use your knowledge. I don't have that knowledge. Rod probably doesn't have much of it, and most humans on the planet don't have much knowledge of that. Sane architects are always welcome who think in a BSD way, be it from a library perspective, from a sane coding practices, etc. No, we don't want C++ as the language, or Go, or Rust, or whatever. So drop me a line. It's completely blue sky, after-hour volunteer effort. No company has shown any interest in it. Maybe there were discussions at BSD again. I don't know. I sent Rod in my place, and hopefully you had a good time. So yeah, drop me a line.
Cool.
That's all I can say.
So recently you've done a lot of work with FreeNAS and ZFS. How did that get started?
Yeah. So it's funny. I'd argue that in all this open source stuff, and I've done quite a bit of it with quite a lot of people, two of the greatest gateway drugs ever have been pfSense and FreeNAS. They are useful to, just like the original Linux killer app, Samba, allowing users to print. What a concept. Oh, the printer works. Great. You got a new print server? Don't tell the boss it's Linux. So those are really useful killer apps, and I've been a friend of IX Systems since about 2007, so pushing a decade now. Met them down at Scale back when it was a small crew, just spreading the word in ways that no other vendor of that nature has done previously or since. And I absolutely respect them for that. And all open source software needs hardware. So they actually made the right decision 20 years ago. Like, what if in the future computers will be commodity and run open source? What a crazy idea. Well, that's how every single data center runs these days. So I love IX Systems. So FreeNAS was somewhat primitive in the early days. They did a great rewrite, but still ZFS version 15 or is that the ZPL version? It was a bit rough, a few rough edges there, but it got really good. And at some point we had a conversation, hey, we're pushing higher end storage, but that the need for support is just ceaseless. So, hey, could you take a look at just helping out these folks? And I thought, okay, this might get my command line skills back up to snuff some. And so I've been helping them out with outsourced support. And that's been great in seeing the crazy stuff people do with FreeNAS. Oh, you're doing an iSCSI share to the Mac Mini server with server version of OS 10 that's shared out further. Oh, I don't think they tested that in the lab, All
right.
So if you enable people with something like this, the sky's the limit on what they'll do. I mean, there's no artificial constraint on FreeNAS, so you can build a petabyte of storage if you want. Go for it. Nothing's stopping you. You just have to know what you're doing. So that's been quite enlightening on just, it's great to help people out. It's been very enlightening to see how people screw up and how you can blow away your data using either the official tools or dumb mistakes. And so, yeah, it's just been a useful experience that I have transferred to helping them out with some of their marketing. And I do some training. That's just out of circumstance. It's like, hey, I don't want the phone call of you panic saying, I just did this dumb thing that could have been easily avoided yesterday. It's like, oh, no, call me a month before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's growing into more and more enterprisey things, but maybe we'll touch on that.
So I guess since everything there is kind of based around ZFS, what would be your favorite feature of ZFS at this point?
That's a loaded question, but
You had to pick one.
Let's pretend it didn't have great checksumming, snapshotting, copy on write, all those great under the hood
Right,
things.
all the just as important things.
I'd say the portability, because the alternative is FAT32 on the card on my little old phone or this Zoom recorder. It's like, hey, there's a portable file system, although it might have like patent encumbrance.
But is it really portable? Does it work on Big Endian?
Right, that kind of thing. And then over a certain size and all that pain and suffering.
UFS can work Big Endian or Little Endian, but you have to decide when you make it, and it doesn't. You can't. Even if you format a USB stick UFS on your computer, if you stick it in a MIPS device, you won't be able to read it.
I didn't know that.
Because the bits are written in the other order.
Ooh, I did. Okay, there you go.
Non-portable.
Yeah,
interesting.
And ZFS, that was one of the design goals. Is it had to work on x86 and Spark, which are opposite. They write the bits in the opposite order in the hardware. And so ZFS is one of the only file systems that is actually agnostic to that.
So if we ever had a ZFS for WinPort that was successful, we'd have a truly universal file system at this point.
That's it. Now, I thought there was recent talk of some kind of plugin for Windows or who knows what. There's lots of talk. Talk's easy. But I'm running it with an old Xevo ZFS on a Mac because, hey, I've got V28. It's rock solid. It's missing all the new nifty stuff. I'm well aware of that. It's probably not even very fast, but it works. I can send. I can do all the proper things. I can verify my data. And I've got lots of disks over the years. I have no idea if they're suffering from bit rot. Not a clue. And here, I think, Alan, we may have talked about this. Someone, please go out there and come up with a simple framework to download all the really common stuff. Windows patches, Ubuntu DVDs, Wikipedia dumps, and big, giant, well-known turds of data. Checksum them and see if they are experiencing bit rot from like 20 different mirrors, because I don't think your average mirror administrator is running ZFS. I don't think people would even know if they had a little bit rot problem. And we've had these studies from people like Backblaze and Google about their disk experiences. Great, but I don't think there's ever been a desktop bit rot study by anyone ever. Go for it. Go make a name for yourself. Please, just go do it.
It came up recently because Apple announced their new file system that's not going to check some of your data. And they're like, well, as far as we know, no one's ever had bit rot on HFS. And lots of people are like, yes, we have.
Yes, we have. All the time.
Yeah.
And you have literally no way of knowing until it's too late. That's the problem. So, I think you and I, Alan, both reviewed that document. I'm very glad he published that and saved us all a lot of time. It's awesome.
So, pie in the sky, what feature would you like to see come next to ZFS?
So I've seen the worst of bhyve and the worst of ZFS. So space map rebuild, I think even Josh Petzel said it's not necessarily that complex to just step through and attempt to reassemble the internal structures of it. So only yesterday.
Fix the fragmentation problem?
I know that'd be different.
Well, okay. Yeah. So a few things.
That's what I want.
A few things. Yesterday I learned that Newegg will sell you a drive savers recovery for 3 years for like $36 per drive. That can save you about $1,500 to up to, let's just say, $21,000 on a larger array, because I've been seeing this in the trenches. Because, hey, Drive Savers has technologies that none of us have. I think they're doing even OEM support for, say, Oracle and their storage products. So that said, any amount of rebuild tools out here in the wilds would be appreciated. And I'm always listening, so I heard things like the space map rebuild. Great. One problem with ZFS is that it is so persnickety and strict that if your data is corrupt in any way, it says you can't have it. No, it's like, well, can I get like whatever's left? I'm like, no. You don't want that. It's like, yes, I do. If 3/4 is left, I'll take it. Great. That can probably get us back in business. So that sheer, strict, brutal position of it has been, I'd say, a limiting factor. So, because when it's broken, it can be very broken. And I've looked at the data structure walk scripts and like, oh, here's the block decompressor and empty. It's like, oh God, I know Drive Savers does that, but I can't do that. I don't know how to do it. Yeah. So
I've seen
and there's not enough tribal wisdom on it to do that super easily, in a hacker lounge at a BSD can. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting that, ZFS usually doesn't fail quite often enough to need official tools for fixing it. But, and there are people in the ZFS team that love digging into it and figuring out what happened and trying to get your data back. But yeah, I think there's a Perl script somewhere that uses ZDB and can extract individual blocks and so on.
Python, I think, yeah.
But
George Wilson, I think, was doing that.
Yeah.
And I asked Matt Ahrens, like, well, have you sent anything to Drive Savers? And well, he'd never make those mistakes. Mm-hmm. Josh Petzel won't make those mistakes. You two won't make those mistakes.
Sure.
Like, well, why would you ever do that? It's like people apply their RAID knowledge to it. And they're like, hey, I've got this old Delt perk. Yeah, I think the battery's dead, but hey, we'll use this. And wow, it's fast with the cache. And wow, there's a great way to obliterate your data. And so, yes, it doesn't need an FSCK, but any type of structural rebuild or protection would be great. Yes, the fragmentation mitigation would be great. I was hoping you could just resilver a drive and it comes out essentially defragged, but no, it apparently keeps the original mathematical map and puts all the data back where you had it. It's like, grumble, grumble.
Well, there's a reason it has to do it that way, but yes.
There is a reason. Great. We'll change that reason. And I think at one point Matt said it would be theoretically possible to have a pool, only compromise an amount of data that's lost on a specific disk and other things. And hey, all you smart people, hey, go for it. But one little thing I brought up, so a bunch of, let's just say, bhyve related people love to use the user settable flags for metadata, like, hey, here's the VM's information. Well, those are administrative tasks that often stop your entire array. And
they don't
I think it was
stop
Baptiste.
Yeah, it's very slow.
Baptiste tried it at scale and it fell down at scale. So rather than harsh on that or brag about that, I talked to Matt Ahrens at the February, was it, Storage Summit? And he did see some value in, I think he called it a fast option, where it's a really lightweight saving of that type of data without considering it a completely atomic administrative operation. So maybe there's some hope there, but hey,
there was a recent change.
ZFS is not a key value store. Right. Go use SQLite.
But there was a recent change where ZFS set you can set multiple properties in one go. So you can set 10 of them in one administrative command instead of doing 10 separate commands that each require a full transaction.
Great. These are smart people. They're doing the right thing.
At BSDCan during the Birds of a Feather session, there was a user that brought up a point of when you've had so many checksum errors or something and the disk is faulted, being able to get it to come back somehow it's like it was a temporary condition and the disk is actually fine now. Can I read from it again? And I think Matt had a few ideas there. And then one of the presentations by one of the students Matt Ahrens brought was they're making improvements to zpool import to give more meaningful error messages and to let you import read-only in more cases. So in more of those cases where something's a little off and ZFS is just like, nope, the checksum isn't perfect, I'm not taking your pool, at least let you maybe get it read-only enough so you can get your data off of it and rebuild your pool and stuff. So
And here's a tip. Read-only will save your behind in a great many circumstances, be it deduplicated, be it full, be it all sorts of things. Yeah. So, the more the merrier. And you all know more about that than I ever will. But I'll gladly tell you what people are screwing up in the wilds.
Cool. Wait, we got to change gears a little bit here as we're getting close to the wrap up. But we got to ask you about the Portland Linux Users Group, which you run. So I guess you cover a lot of BSD topics. So tell us a little bit about what it takes to run a successful user group.
Okay, so my former boss at Linux Fund was organizing that, and he was pretty much a primary organizer, although there were some other folks for advanced topics and other meetings. We have 3 meetings per month, go figure. And he was teaching in Portland a lot less, so it was like, okay, I was back in the US, and I'm like, sure, let me help out a little, and one thing led to another. So yes, I've organized the last 100 or so speakers for that. You can go to pdxlinux.org, and go ahead and check out my talk at Linux Fest Northwest. I gave a talk on enduring communities, 20 years and longer. And I then was wrangled into giving a second talk on switching to BSD from GNU Linux. And that was both popular and popularized by your producer. Thank you for that. It became a rather popular talk, and I don't even know his secrets on that. But I cover most of my key points of just, hey, what it takes. Like FreeNAS, like bhyve, keep it simple. KISS, just that's the number one thing. I was a founding member of the Latvian Open Source Association, LACA, and they decided to become a non-public benefit nonprofit. And after a few months, every single meeting devolved into who's going to file the paperwork for the recent tax return, blah, 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 just over the $10 donation we make per year. Like, don't do that. Plug is as formal as a domain name, and free hosting, free venues, and then blood, sweat, and tears. And that's sustainable. And you'll see that talks sometimes go up pretty last minute. I'm pretty proud that this week's talk on Ganesha NFS from a local developer, Mr. Phils, is going to be streamed. Thank you, Alan, for providing streaming. Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time, you can check out that talk. And things like Ganesha NFS, now that people are scaling out with Lustre and you name it, we need user space NFS daemons so you can plop it on top of this massive distributed file system. That's pretty cool. I've had some pretty good speakers. I've had Mr. Unobtainium himself, Linus Torvalds, who kindly came down for our 20-year anniversary meeting. And I said, hey, man, can you do that? And he's like, yeah, okay. He had shown up at previous events over the years. I was not there during the Git talk that apparently Randall Schwartz gave. And Linus was in the audience. And, of course, someone said, I don't know, let's ask him about some feature. And that's cute, but I missed it. I've had Bradley Kuhn. I've had Kelsey Hightower, who's also in Portland. Both of those are in town. In Portland, I have to import people. So I've had Josh Burkus of massive Postgres fame. He's now at Red Hat. And I don't know. I would be pining to attend a local group. And Chris, you probably understand how that goes. It's like, well, you got to just do it and
just start one,
roll with it. And
although to be fair, I didn't have to start it. Somebody else.
You didn't? Oh, I wasn't
good.
Clear. Great.
I don't know. I mean, we're helping out with it any way we can, but I'm not organizing it, which is bonus.
Perfect. And over time, you'll evolve. A few people will emerge who will help you out. Maybe you don't know how, but they'll be there. And it's as simple as I'm stuck in traffic. Just keep them busy, give them the basics. Simple stuff like that. Check out calligator.org. It's a tech calendar for Portland, and it has everything. And I don't even check it anymore because I have no time to go see all these amazing things, all the DevOps groups, all the you name it groups. There's something for everybody. But that's been great for Plug because I can put up a meeting like the day before or morning before, and someone goes and checks it. It's like, oh, okay, there's a thing on Valgrind. Yes, that's how you pronounce it, the C profiling thing. And people come out of the woodwork and find it. And we have enough tech here, Intel, Tektronix, you name it, that they show up on short notice. And great, that's been working really well rather than just the same people who have done it for 20 years. So I encourage all of you to create a local group, and I'm happy to help you do that. I've consulted various folks. Just do it. I mean, I was the most shy person on the planet, and I would never in 1,000 years give a talk or go on a podcast. And
here you are.
Yeah,
here I am.
I was there too originally.
You were there too, exactly. Yeah. And anyway, so yeah, let's plug. Check it out. If you're in town, if you're passing through town, first Thursday, third Tuesday, want to give a talk, want to practice a talk, let me know. And then there's a clinic on the third Sunday, which is a classic, I guess, lug thing. And I don't even show up at those, but you bring your machine, bring your problems, leave with new problems. And that's some good people.
That's cool.
And yeah.
Cool. So on to yet another topic. What do you find to be missing with the BSDs? I know you had some ideas here.
Okay. Perfect segue, because at I think the last Advanced Topics talk on installers, not InstallFest, but literally installers and different strategies. It was more or less a roundtable, and we got into, okay, Intel's had some layoffs. And some wonderful people have lots of time on their hands, and some of them with golden parachutes. So they've been coming to meetings. Great. So they brought machines. I brought a few clunky old ThinkPads, and somehow the conversation got into installing OpenBSD and FreeBSD. And I will relay their terms. I've got a few tabs open here to help out. So these people design chips. They're really smart. They're extremely smart, and they're really nice. So they go to openbsd.org or freebsd.org and want to install it. And so I brought up some tabs here. FreeBSD, you get a big old download FreeBSD. What's that do? It gives you a framework of essentially directory paths. Whoops, I actually brought up an FTP connection. That's cool. And then you get all these things in there. And so if you go to, say, OpenBSD, it's like, well, go download it, go do whatever. You get pub. You get the release versions. If you're lucky, you'll guess that 5.9 is the highest number. That's cool. Okay, AMD 64. And then you're presented with like 20 items. And I've looked at this directory with, say, virtual machines for about 15 years now, and I still don't know what some of these things are. I guess some are kernels, some are PXE, some are images, some are disk sets. There's stuff. So here's what has to happen across the board on BSDs. Everyone's guilty. The NetBSD one's okay. It gives a similar framework with like, here's install ISO, USB image, blah, blah, blah. So the best I could find would either be, to their credit, pfSense or FreeNAS, where there's a big download button. There's a hash. You choose your architecture. You choose your install type. If it's a hybrid CD or flash stick, great. There's optional documentation on how to flash that under Windows, under Mac, under you name it. And you eliminate a good potential half hour to hour and easy early exit of the user. Like, screw this. Yeah. And Gentoo, wall of options. I can't make sense of that. And I will take a moment to absolutely beat up on Gentoo. I was cleaning up my virtual machine download source ISOs directory, and I found one that, maybe I can read that here. It's like, dist files. So we go into, I strip off the host name because often that changes, and it's, a proper mirror allows that to be completely agnostic. So it can be mirror3, whatever, and it's in pub/freebsd/openbsd, whatever. Sure. So Gentoo releases /AMD64/auto builds with a date stamp, and install AMD64 minimal with a date stamp .iso.contents.digest and all this stuff. And I found this. I'm like, I have no idea what OS this is. Not a clue. Zero clue. And there isn't even a text file to explain it because I'm just grabbing the payloads there. And like, what the hell? You're not helping users. So step one on any user of any size. And here's the beauty of modern open source. Sitting at the supercomputing convention at a Mellanox party I just found myself at, there are Navy researchers who are using FreeNAS at home, and they get to work and say, why the hell aren't we using this? This is better than our big expensive thing. So don't make any assumptions about your users or their motivations. Just make it freaking easy. So, hey, you, the show, how about download bsd.org? It is nothing more than, Alan, is there some way to tell where a user comes from geographically? Is there like any technology to do that? Oh, what do you know? Is that expensive? It must be expensive, right? No. Well, so download bsd.org. It geo-IPs and says, hey, are you in this country? Just a little whatever. It lets you pick a distribution. I even brought up BitRig and MirrorOS and all these other ones that are sort of popular BSDs to somebody. Let them choose their architecture, let it find the closest mirror rather than paging through these 20-page directory outputs on potentially dozens of mirror servers, which is just not cool. Don't make that go away. I live in those download directories and create my own repos and all that. But for the new users, make that easy, please.
Sure.
So, there's number one, and it's, we're all geeks. We're like thinking, oh, the virt.io interrupts. It's like, no, just make it downloadable and turn off whatever just chauvinism you have about how that's the proper way, or it's always been done that way, or your OS is best, and all that nonsense. No, just stop, please. That's not helping the community. And I mean, the enlightened organization runs all this stuff. At least for FreeNAS support, they close their pfSense tab and open up the FreeNAS one. Oh, hold on, let me fix it. Okay, now let's try to get to work. And hopefully they run OpenBSD as a router. Hopefully they're using all the things. And the same goes for IX Systems customers. They run a combination of the lowest end short depth Qt server to the massive petabytes of storage, because everything has its place. And don't make assumptions on that, because those artificial restrictions, especially dumb ones like trying to find the software, just don't help. They turn people off really quick. And back to the Intel engineers sitting there trying to figure out which of these 20 things they download, because it's like they know how it all works, but they can't invest that time into just doing it. So there's an extremely simple way to help out everybody.
True.
Yeah.
So speaking of some other projects, though, I guess the question we have to ask is, what do you think of some of the new projects that have kind of spawned out of the BSDs, like Hardened BSD or say like BitRig forks?
Yeah, forks. So a little historical context. Back in the 80s, 90s, all the big vendors forked BSD and laughed their way to the bank. And so you've got NetApp, Juniper, Nokia. Remember Nokia routers? Those were a thing where they took BSD, forked it, did their own little distro, and created something that made money for somebody. So Isilon, Panasas, you name it, they've all done it. And so a funny thing happens when you do that. A decade on, they're like, oh, you like a user group. You break it, you bought it, you're the host if you don't have a speaker, and you're the speaker. So you break it, you bought it with the OS. It's like, we forked it. We don't have SMP. We don't have 64-bit. We don't have drivers for modern hardware. And we don't have all this great stuff that's come out of the community. We don't have architectures that, like, ARM64. It's like, oh, well, if we had to do that internally, it would never happen. But there it is. The community's doing it. That's a good thing. So I guess to his credit, Benno Rice has been talking about how at Isilon they've realized you have to live in head. You have to live in the current development branch of the software. And for OpenBSD, that's often been the most stable software. In FreeBSD, that is increasingly where you find stable, great software. Thank you, whoever is making that happen, because there was a point there where it's like, here's my explosive turd, I'll put it in head and let everyone else deal with it. No. So that's the very expensive, you break it, you bought it, forking of software. But then we've seen things like OpenBSD forking from NetBSD. I guess, let's just say a successful fork early on. Dragonfly, yep, they did it too. But the question is, would OpenBSD survive without Theodore Rat? Would PCBSD, not that it's a fork, would it survive without this Chris Moore guy? Would Dragonfly survive without
Matt Dillon?
Has he been on the show?
No.
Yeah, Dillon. So there's, yes, a place for that, but there's this paradox, like so many things in open source, where if you suck at it, that sucks because, well, it's like under support and you're behind. You get like Mir OS, which is a fork of OpenBSD, which has put their shell apparently in Android, so to his credit. But if you look at the downloads, they haven't updated the actual OS since like OpenBSD 3 something. So, whoops, you can't use it for anything meaningful. So it sucks if you suck, and then worse, if you're good at it, and you get people dependent on it, and you could go away because, hey, let's just say Chris Moore completely forked FreeBSD and you have this amazing, useful OS. Well, would it survive if this guy or woman or whoever disappears for whatever reason? They, like FreeNAS being abandoned. It's like, well, we want to go to Debian. Well, but we want it here. So the right thing happened in that sort of hit by a truck scenario, even though there fortunately was no truck. But going up a little, there was the Trusted BSD project with Watson and a whole bunch of proper people. And there is obviously a time for a science project, as Jordan would put it. And great, but I don't know if hardened BSD is a science project or a fork or what, because the work has to happen. That's great. Maybe in a separate repo is the place to do it. That could easily be a free BSD branch. bhyve was a branch. bhyve UEFI was a simple little micro branch. That's I fear hubris in all of that, because what if hardened rocked and he gets bored? It's like, great. So, or the small team or whatever. So forks are a bit like exiting the EU. There are many hidden repercussions, and no mathematical model will spell them all out. And I've got family in England who watched Brexit happen. I helped cast a vote to get Latvia in the EU. So it's really complex, and be very cautious about getting excited about all that. Cool. So yeah, there's my take on forks and their risks.
And then we had a question kind of related to something you touched on earlier. How did you manage to find Rod Grimes and get him to BSDCan?
I answered that.
Not entirely.
You sent him in your places, I think what you said?
He's local.
Okay.
He's a good guy. Mm-hmm. Somehow we found out about the BSD pizza group that Andrew Fresh has been putting on. So every last Thursday of the month, they get together, and I've tried to make it down to those. And we have a few neat people. I wish Ted Middlestat would show up. He did the Free BSD Corporate Networking Guide way the heck back. And David Greenman is in Hillsborough, and I might have a lead on him. But anyway, Rod just started showing up and introduced himself and quietly revealed a little more every time I talked to him. So I've been working on him for about a year now, and first duped him into talking at Plug about smart type stuff at an advanced topics meeting, which is more of a powwow roundtable. And he's got the right attitude. He's flat out awesome. Alan, you were in the room at the hotel after the the storage summit. And I'm like, okay, Julian, you're here from Australia? So hold on. Peter's off in the restroom. We're just hanging out to go off to dinner. I'm like, Rod, you dead? No, I'm not dead. Yeah, here's Julian. And they just talked for 10 minutes, because it's like, wait, I was in the Bay Area for 20 years. You never said hi once. But now he's in Australia, blah, blah, blah. So that was a key seed to plant in his head. These people are nice. They're still here. They've got stories to tell. So I've been working on Rod, and then it was just dumb luck that 2 snow days delayed my daughter's graduation smack into the middle of BSDCan. Rather than during the Dev Summit, which would have sucked, it was just smack right in the middle. So I'm like, I don't have a supersonic jet, and if I did, it would be expensive. So, hey, Rod, you want to give my talk? And okay, let's ask the organizers. Okay, yeah, let's work all this out. And I guess one thing led to another. You tell me what happened.
You got sucked into giving a second talk as well.
The second talk, and then just recently, he's rejoined release engineering. He was apparently the first release engineer, and things like the server freefall are named after his parachuting hobbies. And Rod's a good guy. Rod, and as Glenn put it through a little private conversation, he can't wait to meet Rod, because Rod doesn't take crap from nobody.
There you go.
I admire that. So, but he'll listen. He's thoughtful. He knows his stuff, and I still learn something about his knowledge every time I talk to him. So,
cool. Yeah. Okay, well, we're actually ready to wrap it up here. But is there anything else you want to mention really quick before we say goodbye?
I'm good. Going down my list here. Ask questions. There's the most profound advice I can give based on a decade or two of experience. Thank you two for the show. Thank you for various things you've done to make things better. Alan, the breakthrough is you in boot environments and just making that first off, making that available at install time. It's like, wow, we have this killer app. It's virtually unusable. Great. Yeah, so then, we have killer app boot environments. Yep. It's a pain in the butt to use. That was huge. Congratulations, both of you, on the core team ascension. I think some good things will come out of that. FreeBSD has been great about multi-generations of leadership in various forms. Hallelujah. Anyway,
Okay.
Yes. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I think that's a wrap, man. It's been great. We really enjoyed having you on today.
My pleasure. It was inevitable. I knew I'd come on. Just
All right. Finally did it.
everything came together, and the timing was right because hey, things are getting good with bhyve, and yeah, package space, everyone. That's exciting. And
Yep.
OpenBSD's had skipdir, which is a very elegant solution where with the recursive build, you just skip a directory. Oh, let's not do send mail. Let's not do thing. So anyway,
Nice.
I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. See you at the next conference for sure. Okay, back from the interview. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you, Michael, for coming on this week. Of course, we both really appreciate that, you taking the time to do that with us. So we got news roundup to get to, and of course, feedback and questions. We have some BSD bits this week. I mean, we're loaded for bear. We got everything. But before we start getting into that, of course, we're going to mention another sponsor this week, and we're going to be going to IX Systems Now, which, of course, the website for that, ixsystems.com/BSDNow. You'll want to go hit that site so they know you heard about it here because they love talking to our listeners. So that's a good deal. You want to mention that you heard it here. And, of course, we have an article today to talk about the YouTube video talking about the Children's Minnesota Star Studio chooses IX Systems TrueNAS storage, which is an interesting article about why they decided to deploy TrueNAS at their base of operations there. You may want to check that out. And of course, IX does everything from TrueNAS to beefy servers to custom built jobs down to the little FreeNAS minis that are really cute and quiet and sit under your desk. And, you wouldn't even notice it was there unless, you actually had to poke it for some reason. But for the most part, they just sit there and keep on serving. And of course, IX uses the latest and greatest Intel processors and quite a variety of them. They can get a hold of all sorts of different things for you, including, I guess you needed some somewhat harder to find ones at one point for one of your servers, and they were able to do that.
There's only like 2 or 3 models of the E3 Xeon that have the graphics card included on the chip. And I needed not just that specific thing, but I needed a certain generation of it because even Linux didn't have drivers for QuickSync for anything newer than Haswell. And so trying to get 3 generation old of a rather rare CPU means that nobody stocks it anymore.
That's right.
It's like, we could. Lots of people can sell you the V5. It's like, yeah, but I need the V3 specifically. And there's only 2 motherboards in the world that'll work in the right combination for this. That was.
And they managed to deliver all of that.
They made sure I ended up with what I needed, and that was. Even though in this particular case, it wasn't necessarily something they even knew about, but they knew where to get the information and how to do the research and were able to figure it out for me instead of leaving that all up to me.
That's why it's so important when you call the folks over at IX, you tell them exactly what it is you're wanting to do. Because they have actual sales engineers. So you say mail server, or you say file server, or you say I need to be able to stream this much data over the internet, over the network, continuous without being interrupted, no drop-offs. Give them your minimum performance requirements.
That's the big thing. A lot of people talk about, well, I need it to be able to do at least, I need it to be able to do this much. It's like, tell us what the absolute worst it has to always do. Like, you can never drop below this many IOPS. And that's what you design it for. It's like, sure, you can design a system that's like, well, each drive can do up to this many IOPS, and so that means we could do 1 million. Yeah, it's like, sure, it can do 1 million, but what's it under the worst possible case? What's it going to still be able to do? We need it to do at least 100,000, no matter what. It doesn't matter if we can do 1 million under best case scenario.
In the lab, there's one thing to do it in the lab, but in real world usage, like what's the minimum performance you need? So they understand all that. They don't have to just sell you a system that's just off the shelf. They can figure out, okay, how can we customize this? Where does it make more sense, to put more bang for your buck, so to speak? Do you need more ZIL? Do you need more ARC? Is your RAID configured properly? Which disks should we put in there? And so forth. So definitely talk to them, and they will get you hooked up with whatever the right solution is going to be for your particular situation. And of course, when you talk to them, mention that you heard it here because they love hearing from our listeners. Okay, so let's move on here. So the news roundup, we have the FreeBSD Foundation's June 2016 update has come out. So what are some of the highlights that came out in this?
Well, they mentioned watch out for events, including Texas Linux Fest, which is coming up starting on Friday, I suppose. So you're going to be, or Saturday, I guess. But there's also...
It starts Friday.
Hope 11 conference, which will be, I guess, is the 22nd to the 24th in New York. And then for developers, there's BSD Cam, which is in Cambridge in the UK, which is August 15th through 17th. But it opens with the message from the executive director. So Deb Goodkin kind of talks about how exciting it's been so far this spring and summer of FreeBSD, but also that in order to keep doing stuff, the FreeBSD Foundation needs your donations. So, please consider making a donation to the FreeBSD Foundation. Then in the development project status, we have an interesting little bit here. Ed and Konstantin Belasov wrote about the FreeBSD virtual memory system. In particular, a little bit about the background, and then FreeBSD developer Peter Holm has been working for over 10 years building a stress testing tool for the FreeBSD kernel, and that test suite has identified a number of different issues, about 1,400 in total, that have been detected by the stress test suite. Over the same 10 years, Caustic has investigated 910 of those issues, averaging 93 per year, which these particular issues are very complicated and have complex interactions where, making one change here will change like 4 other things over here. And it's like, okay,
unintended consequences.
We fixed this bug and that actually broke 3 things that used to work and so on. So
turns out computers are hard.
So he talks specifically a bit about the VM objects and the way they do copy on write when you fork a program and so on. And he says that while these issues have been present for a long time, some other change made them occur more frequently in FreeBSD 10.2. And he kind of gives this background story on how that investigation went and identifies some of the commits that solved that problem going forward. And he says issues like these need to be found and fixed, and have a stable and reliable operating system. And people's donations to the FreeBSD Foundation will continue to support Caustic's work to get through all of those bugs and all the new ones that are found, and make sure that the FreeBSD VM system is always in good shape.
Okay.
They also have some conference reports, including one from the Usenix Annual Technical Conference. And one from BSDCan. And they talk a bit about BSDCan was also where the FreeBSD Foundation has their yearly board meeting, and they added some new people to the board and elected a new vice president and so on. There was also a meeting of the FreeBSD Journal team that decides, they kind of decided what the topics for the next issues should be and so on with that, and how to get more people to write for the journal, and so on and so on. And they talk about running the booth and about their work with Microsoft on the Azure project, and how they managed to raise $4,550 for the FreeBSD Foundation at BSDCan.
Oh, wow.
And they also have some pictures of the Minoboard Turbots that Netgate donated, including this nice one with the new FreeBSD Foundation logo and a big maple leaf on it that they gave away. And also mentioned the people they recognized for their contributions to FreeBSD at the end of BSDCan, including Rod Grimes, who's one of the founders of FreeBSD, Gleb Smirnov, who's been the deputy security officer, and Brian Drury, who's done all the work on the build system, and Warren Block for his work on the translation system. They also mentioned that with your donations, they were able to sponsor travel grants to get some developers to BSDCan who otherwise wouldn't have been able to come. And the trip reports for those people have started to show up on the Foundation's blog. So if you'd like to read about what those people did while they were there and what advantages the project got out of sponsoring them, those are up on the Foundation's blog. And then they have the reminder, the FreeBSD Community Feedback Survey. That closes tomorrow, so which is July 7th. So please, if you haven't already, make sure you fill out the FreeBSD Community Feedback Survey. And the link for that is also in the show notes, as well as in their update that got emailed. And I've also pasted it in the chat room just now for anybody who's watching live. And then they've also got a new project started, getting started with FreeBSD. Which is the Foundation hired an intern for the summer, and they're going to be working on making a series of videos helping new users get started with FreeBSD. So basically, the intern was computer literate but had not used BSD before, and is basically documenting their steps as they go through their first experiences with using it, and they're also submitting PRs and so on along the way whenever they run into trouble, but also helping to identify where documents are missing, where documents are too hard to find, and all that kind of stuff.
It's always good to have a fresh set of eyeballs do that periodically, because we kind of get used to things and we know where those sharp edges are, right? Like, oh, we don't do it that way.
Yeah, I know how to work around it, but also, I know where to find the documentation. It's because, I probably edited it or something at some point.
Yeah.
But as a new user, they just have a perspective that once you're familiar with the project, you can't ever get that back. And it's kind of too bad, but it just means, for new people, helping us identify some of those problems are important.
True. Okay, well, very cool. Sounds like definitely a good roundup there. All right, so next up we have a how-to this week, building the FreeBSD OS from scratch. It looks like over at AllNet Tools, the forums has a walkthrough on how to build it from scratch. Although I love your comment in here. I'm not sure why anyone would want to build Xorg from source, but yes, you can. That is true. Avoid that pain if you can help it. That's what packages were invented for, right? But looks like it's pretty complete here. It covers everything, quite a bit of detail, from the installation process through adding Xorg, and of course setting up a window manager from source as well, which maybe that should be something people have to do once. It's a proof of concept, and then it makes you appreciate the package system all the more afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, that was fun. I know how to do it now. I'm never going to do it.
Yeah, when you do package upgrade and it goes slightly, it just nags you about that one package that's not going to work, and you're like, it's like you should have to suffer through what we used to have to do, and then you will understand, and then you will love package.
You'll have proper appreciation,
unconditional love for Baptiste and the package tool.
That's right. Well, that's cool. So it looks like, I guess you wrote here that they included some tweaking of device node permissions for easier operation as non-root user, which is always helpful. And of course, configuring the firewall.
Yeah, they made a bunch of devices writable by the operators group and so on, so that they could, mount USB sticks and all that kind of stuff as a non-root user.
Okay. Good deal.
They also have stuff on here and like updating the operating system with FreeBSD update and so on, using PortSnap to get the latest ports. And I guess they even have stuff in here for printing and USB and all that stuff.
Pretty complete. Yeah. That's basically rolling PCBSD from scratch.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing there. That's a good thing to do, though. Okay, so tell us about this next one here, Alan. We got Windows systems should be transparent. What does this mean? Or Windows systems, sorry.
Yeah, so this is an old article from the original AT&T Bell Laboratories that invented Unix. At the time, most of the window managers and so on that you would get for a Unix system were commercial. You had to actually buy them.
Yeah.
This is commercial Unix Windows systems are unsatisfactory. Because they are cumbersome and complicated, they are unsuitable companions for an operating system that is appreciated for its technical elegance. Their clumsy user interfaces clutter the view of the operating system. A good interface should clarify the view, not obscure it. Mux is one window manager that is popular and therefore worth studying as an example of good design. It is not commercially important because it only runs on obsolete hardware. So this paper uses Mux as a case study to illustrate some principles that can help keep a user interface simple, comfortable, and unobtrusive. When designing their products, the purveyors of commercial Windows systems should keep these principles in mind. Of course, this was written back when people made commercial desktop environments. Now they're mostly open source. But it doesn't mean that the advice and so on in this paper isn't timeless and quite useful. And I think...
I say I never heard of Mux, so I'm not sure.
Exactly. I don't even know what it looks like.
What that ran on, right?
But, some of the history stuff in here is pretty great, and it'd be
that's cool.
Interesting to look at some of it.
Yeah. And see, I guess they were struggling with a lot of the same things that here we are, 2016, we're still doing. Cool. Okay, so as we wrap up the roundup here, we got one sad thing to mention, that Roger Faulkner of Solaris fame recently passed away. which, of course, we wish him rest in peace. He's the creator of the one and true /proc, slayer of end-to-end threading model, and godfather of the post-AT&T Unix. So we have some links to some different stories here. It looks like Brian Cantrell posted something up on Twitter.
A couple times, yeah. So the one he's got is Brian told a story about the pgrep utility. So these those weren't written by Roger Faulkner, but when writing them, pgrep used to have the ability to grep based on the weight channel, which on Solaris it turns out isn't really used and isn't useful, or at least at the time. On FreeBSD, it's definitely still used and it's very powerful. And being able to grep based on that would be super awesome.
Sure.
And but anyway, he basically tells a story of trolling someone using this pgrep. And anyway, it's an amusing story, and you should go read it over on Hacker News. And then he has another story somebody else posted on Hacker News about how they ended up getting mentored and becoming friends with Roger Faulkner by basically just sitting in his office and saying they're just going to sit there and belt and flatulate until he taught them how to do it. And so on. And there's some very interesting stories in there. And yes, the main link here is a small obituary they wrote about him on the POSIX standards mailing list, which kind of has some of the history of the different things he worked on from the 70s through to the 2000s.
Okay.
But yes, he's basically invented the real /proc file system that has been so popular for such a long time. That's interesting.
Okay. Well, you should definitely read those links here. And of course, we pay our respect to Roger Faulkner and all the greatness that he was able to bring to the system that led to what we have today. Okay, folks, we have a lot of BSD bits this week, so we are going to rapid fire these here in just a second. But before we do, let's go to the last sponsor for the week, which is going to be Tarsnap, and of course, website, tarsnap.com/BSDNow. And we've been telling you guys about Tarsnap for quite a while. So first of all, those who have started using it, thank you. We appreciate that. And I know the folks at Tarsnap do as well. And those who haven't yet, come on. It's time to get your backups done properly. Don't make me do a hashtag backup shaming or something here, because you need to be doing your backups offsite and in a secure manner. It's fully encrypted, the whole 9 yards. And how many open source software is out there that can claim anything like this? I don't know of any other ones.
There's the one,
so
and that's why it's on the show here.
That's why we talk about it here. So you want to go ahead and go to the website today and get signed up. Making an account just take you a couple minutes. Put a few bucks in there initially to get you started. They measure the amount you're gonna. They charge you in pico dollars, so it dwindles very slowly. So you'll see.
I haven't
see that happen. Of course.
I just set it up, and I haven't thought about it since January.
Yeah, I think I put $20 in like a year and a half ago, and I haven't touched it since. So my backup doesn't change a lot day to day. But anyway, it's good stuff. And of course, they have everything's done securely. If you lose the encryption key, the data's gone. Or if you want to get rid of the data, you just destroy the encryption key and the data's gone. They cannot recover it because it's fully encrypted up in the cloud server.
Well, it's encrypted on your side before it goes to the cloud.
Excuse me. Yes, of course. Encrypted on your system before it goes out over the wire. So they don't have a copy of your keys. They don't want your keys. They don't want to know what your data is. It's just random bits to them, which is the way it's supposed to be. So go ahead and get signed up today, folks. At go ahead and set up at tarsnap/BSDNow. And of course, if you talk to anyone, let them know that you heard about it here. We'd appreciate that.
And if you peruse through the source code and find any problems, let them know. And there's bug bounties.
Yep. Okay, so let's go to the BSD bits here. So like I said, as promised, rapid fire. So first up, developer Ed Mast is requesting information from those who are users of libvgl.
Yeah, so as part of the change from syscons to VT, the new graphical console in FreeBSD that's required to support DRM and so on, there are a couple of bits of the old stuff that doesn't quite work on the new one, and he's trying to find people that use it and understand their use case so that only the bits that are actually going to be used can be implemented to save some time.
Cool. Okay, we'll do that if you're one of those users. So it looks like Dragonfly 4.5 World needs rebuilding, so a heads up there. So if you're a Dragonfly user, it might be time to pull and rebuild the world really quickly here.
This is Cephi warning that things like netstat will break if your kernel and world are not in sync. likely
bummer.
because of changes he made to the networking stack.
Okay. Cool. Well, here we go. So next up, Chris Buechler is actually leaving the PF Sense project. So, of course, the entire community thanks him for his many, many years of service there. And we have a link to the blog article. I guess he's leaving to go ahead and pursue some new career options there.
Outside of PF Sense. So I guess at some point, you've been doing PF Sense for 10 years or something, and you're like, well, it's time to do something different.
Sure.
On Twitter, he's not yet saying where he's going, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, good stuff.
Look forward to seeing his future contributions in some other area.
Okay, so Ghost BSD 10.3 Beta 1 is now available. So if you'd like to grab that, we have a link to the website. You can go ahead and check that out. And then we have a Dragonfly BSD adds a NVM ECTL. So I guess that's for NVMe.
Yes, this allows you to configure your NVMEs and also interrogate them and get information. I think they borrowed some of it from OpenBSD and some of it from FreeBSD, I think. I forget how that worked. But yes, it's good to see that they have the data management stuff for NVMe now.
Yeah, I was just curious what the tunables were. I'll have to look at that later. But still, cool. Okay, OpenSense 16.1.18 has dropped. So that's out. So it's time to update your OpenSense box, or if you're planning on switching over or trying it or whatever, there's a new release for you to play with. Go grab it.
They also mentioned that they're starting release candidates for 16.7 as part of their twice-a-year release model soon. So there's, I think, some details about that on their site as well.
Okay, cool. And lastly here, before we get into the bug updates, bhyve graphics have now finally landed in current.
Yes.
So we've talked about that a while back, about having the VNC server and the new UEFI and all that.
Yeah, and it was up.
But the actual,
it was in a.
it's not.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It was in a project branch, so you had to check that out over top of your existing tree and do some hoop jumping to compile it. But now it's just part of regular FreeBSD. So that went in 2 days ago. So when the very first beta 1 image comes out, which should happen Friday or Saturday, I think. It will have all the bhyve stuff built in, so you won't need to do anything there. Also, separately, I just saw someone this morning or last night committed a port of the UEFI firmware. The UEFI firmware image, so you won't have to randomly fetch that from Peter's homepage anymore. It'll be available via ports.
That was always I had a couple people run into that where they were messing that step, or they had an old one. And I was like, no, you need the new firmware. And it's nice. It's in a port, which means we'll have a package now. And you can just, I almost wonder if that's something like maybe the bhyve command should be like, you need this package or something.
Yeah, we could probably teach it that.
Run this. Probably wouldn't hurt. Okay, so bug updates. So FreeBSD Central Twitter account is looking for a new owner. So if you're interested in doing that and you're a social media guru, maybe get in touch with those folks. NYC bug meeting. Meet the smallest BSDs, Retro BSD and Light BSD, and Brian Callahan. So we got a
so that's actually
you can check that out
tonight. He meant to tell us last week, but forgot.
Oh, whoops!
Well,
if you're watching live, you might be able to still catch that.
So on July 6th, he's doing his talk about Retro BSD and Light BSD, which are ports of BSD 2.11 and 4.4 to microcontrollers like the PIC32, and he's got it all set up so you can run like a tiny web server and stuff off these super small devices. But they're basically modern versions of the really old classic versions of BSD before there was a NetBSD or a FreeBSD or anything like that.
Interesting.
And then
looks like they're also doing an install fest for Nice Bug at Hope.
Yes, the Hope Conference, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, but that's going on July 22nd through 24th at the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York. And the FreeBSD Foundation will have a table there. And they'll also be running an install fest for BSDs as well. So come out and spread the word about BSDs to people at this conference.
Cool. And it looks like Semi-Bug's looking for presentations for September and beyond. So they're putting basically the call for papers out or presentations or proposals.
Yeah, that's the Southeast Michigan bug run by Michael W. Lucas.
Yeah, for sure. So, hey, do you want to do that? You can go meet Michael W. Lucas in person if you haven't yet. So submit a talk.
Yes, so if you're anywhere near there, definitely check out that bug.
Yep. Okay, and so lastly, we have Caleb Cooper's giving a talk on crypto at the Knox Bug on July 26th. So that's going to be here in my local bug. in the Knoxville area. We actually hold it in Maryville, but close enough. So you'll want to come out to that if you can. That'll be fun. Okay, so I guess we got to get into feedback and questions now, don't we, here, Alan? So we'll start. I guess I'll let you do the first one here because it's talking about ZFS.
Yes.
ZX furs, you would say?
So Liv writes in and says, "Hey guys, great show. I'm trying out ZFS snapshot management in ZXFur to replace some thorny cron jobs. However, the nice thing about my old jobs is that they were maintenance free. When I create a new zpool or ZFS, they'd automatically start snapshotting in once per hour. Is there a way to get ZFS snapshot management to work without explicitly listing all the zpools in the YAML config file? No, but what I would suggest is ditch ZFS snapshot management and switch to ZFS tools, which allows you to manage the snapshots with ZFS properties. And so you can just set on the root of the pool your snapshot policy, and it'll apply it to the whole pool. And then you can override for specific things if you want those to be different, but it allows you to just, with one setting, have everything happen. Yeah, that's what I would recommend, ZFS tools. And then I have a design in the back of my head for a new tool that will do both the snapshots and the transferring. The big problem with ZXFur is due to its design, it doesn't support resumable send and it doesn't support bookmarks, which are both really useful features to me.
Sure.
And it has a couple other problems, and I've tried to maintain it, but a couple of times I've looked at it and was think maybe I want to rewrite it from scratch instead. I don't know, but I'm hoping to have time to work on that someday.
Okay.
But don't wait for me because
we get busy. So next up we have Zach, who writes in and says, "Hey guys, love the show. I'm planning a move to FreeBSD, but I'm a little stuck on the state of Python 3 in FreeBSD. I've read the Python status pages and I don't see any real clear answers. I know that Python 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5 are available, as well as setup tools, but is and should there be a package for Python 3 pip? He said, I compiled PyPip from ports and I can run Python 3 mpip search and interact with it. But when I package search Python 3.4 blah or foo or whatever, I don't see all that much available. Is something blocking the creation of ports for popular Python 3 packages? Is the idea that everything should be installed via pip in a virtual env? It doesn't look all that difficult to package up, if that's the right word. Python ports, could this be automated in some way? I think it's just a matter of people adding the package or the port shims.
I think in particular for this one, they would all exist if the default version of Python was set to Python 3.5, right? I think it's set to 3.4, and so by default, it makes Python 3.3-blah. Now, if you ran your own poudre and you set in the make.conf the default version of Python to Python 3.5, then all of those would suddenly become Python 3.5-blah. So, yeah, the reason there aren't... they just don't do every possible combination because it would quickly add up to too much.
It balloons.
Yeah. And they all conflict and you don't want to get mixing and matching going on. So there's one default version of Python 2 and one default version of Python 3 for the whole ports tree. You can override that locally, but if you're using the binary packages, then only one of them is provided. But if you're building from ports, which it kind of sounds like you might be, then just set the default version and it will do the right thing.
So let's see. So the Python default overall is 2.7, but then the Python 3 default is 3.4. Right. So I was just checking the ports tree. All right. Yeah. Good to know.
If anybody knows more about Python 3 on FreeBSD, tell us and we'll spread the word.
Yep, right.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it personally.
Oh, okay. So next up is Dave. He says, "Hi, Alan and Chris. Thanks for the show as always. A couple questions regarding updates. How do you know your FreeBSD system is up to date, assuming we're using a generic kernel and the trusty FreeBSD update utility?" He says, "For example, I noticed often after running FreeBSD update fetch install and rebooting, the FreeBSD version is not consistent. Why is that?" So there's a reason for that. You have it looks like he's comparing to uname. Yep. Okay.
Well, he's also running the FreeBSD-version command, which is giving him the extra information, but yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. So the FreeBSD version command is what I consider the source of truth because the uname-r or whatever is not necessarily going to get bumped.
The kernel, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So for example, he's talking about here, his kernel is FreeBSD 10.3 P4 and his userland is 10.3 P5. I think the reason for that is the most recent security update was to NTP.
Didn't touch the kernel.
And so it didn't touch the kernel. And so while FreeBSD update could ship you a new kernel and make you reboot, it in this case, to fix NTPD, you didn't actually need to reboot. You could just restart NTPD after installing the update. And so that's why it didn't bump that version, because that would require installing a new kernel and rebooting.
True. So it is a tad bit confusing, but like I said, I always default to the FreeBSD version output for the user.
Yeah, that's why that command was added, because the confusion people kept running into, because they would run uname -a and be like, well, the number didn't go up. And then separately, uname has the capital K and capital U, but those tell you the ABI version number, which on releases is probably never going to change.
Yeah, that should stay the same. You should be a little concerned with that.
If you're running head, then that number goes all over the place.
Yeah, true. Okay, then he said running merge master Etsy update manually is impractical with automation tools. So how do people manage Etsy during upgrades across a large fleet of FreeBSD servers? I think everybody has a lot of different ways of doing that. And I understand the pain involved with running some of those things manually, for sure. So we're letting, we let FreeBSD update handle it before. And I added, for PCBSD, we added a non-interactive flag. So if, for example, there was a merge conflict, it would put the new version of the file there and then back up the old one as like .previous or something like that. And that was the way we did it automatic, right? Yeah. So it wouldn't try and stop and dump you an editor while you're trying to do an update.
ECC update does a better job, and both merge master and ECC update have flags to at least get rid of most of it. Merge master has a flag that's not on by default, which doesn't make any sense. For if the only difference between these two files is the version string, then ignore it.
Just ignore it. Do the right thing. Move on.
Hopefully this will also so package, when we go to package base, has the three-way merge code from Fossil, which is a version management system, kind of like Git or whatever, and it's quite a bit smarter and hopefully will solve most of the problems. But when it doesn't go interactive. It just leaves leaves your old version in place and puts the new one as like whatever.conf.pkg, and then you can, and it gives you a list at the end, and you can go fix it yourself or not, because in most cases it doesn't hurt necessarily. Although
a lot of times you can safely run, but depends on the file.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on to Dave here. He says, hi, Alan and Chris. I'm a relatively new listener and user of FreeBSD, already a huge fan of the community and, of course, all the software. The podcast is amazing, and the guests are always interesting to hear from, even if the sound quality could improve. Hint, hint.
Yeah, sorry.
We'll talk about that in the next comment, too. Or actually, no. That was the mic, I think he's talking about the last couple episodes we did.
Sorry, there's an email about that in next week's show. But yes.
Yeah.
So we use the same mic we always use on interviews, so that wasn't the problem. Although I accidentally launched the Wirecast profile from before we had that mic, and I don't know if it used the wrong mic or if just the volume was too high or something, but it was some problem with the settings, not the hardware, because we used that same microphone in Tokyo, and all those interviews turned out great. So,
all right, well, we'll check it for next time.
We're hoping for more of the future times that we'll be able to drag our producer with us and have someone with headphones on listening as we're recording the interview, and being able to tweak any settings like that to notice.
So can JT bring like one of those boom mics they use, hangs up over us and stuff? No? Too much work? He's probably right now.
If he can even just listen and notice when it's bad and fix it before we start the interview, or before we get, half an hour into an interview or whatever, then
that would be helpful. All right, so David had a question here about disk image files. He says, I'm a frequent user of encrypted Apple disk images for financial and legal documents, but now when I'm transitioning to FreeBSD as my daily operating system, what would be a more portable replacement is easy to use on FreeBSD and hopefully also on Mac OS X? That's a toughie.
Yeah, for both that gets complicated. For just FreeBSD, you can create a file and MD-config it, or use a ZVol and then use Geli on top of it to encrypt it.
Yep.
But for being able to do elsewhere too.
I wish CFS encryption would just get here already, right?
Yeah. Well, it's apparently out for review now.
Okay, that's good. Well, so maybe this will get easier down the road. But yeah, that is a little
yes, because that also
a portable way.
ZFS also means it's a file system that will work on Linux, BSD, Solaris, and OS X. So that's hopefully not a bad way to go. But yeah. Don't really have an answer for that one. Sorry.
Cool. All right, so last up is Eli, who says, Chris, you mentioned Texas Linux Fest being in San Marcos in yesterday's BSDNow episode. This was last week, by the way. The website says it's in Austin this year, so please don't take a taxi ride to San Marcos. I hope you didn't schedule a hotel in San Marcos. And he says, also don't look for Uber or Lyft instead of a taxi. They no longer provide service in the city limits of Austin. He said, look forward to seeing you again. So I misspoke last year. I hadn't looked at the website.
I swear when I looked and added it to the FreeBSD project homepage, it still showed, like, it was like Austin Convention Center, but when I Google mapped that was in San Marcos. But actually
I thought I saw San Marcos somewhere, but no, I'm booked at the right place. I'm going to the right place. I haven't packed or done anything yet to go, so I'm going to be up late tonight getting ready for the trip. But yes, I will be at Texas Linux Fest and hopefully at the right location in the Austin Convention Center. So looking forward to it. Hopefully I'll see you out there. Yep. And thanks for correcting that in case anybody else was confused. Don't drive out to San Marcos.
Yes.
That's a little ways away. So. Okay, so that wraps up all the feedback for the week. So, of course, as we close the show, we're going to remind you, send your questions, comments. If you have show ideas or topics or any stories maybe you want mentioned on the show, send that the feedback at bsdnow.tv. That's the only place we monitor. So send it all there and it'll get queued up. And we like having a backlog of plenty of comments and stories, and that makes us comfortable. We have a little bit of a cushion, right?
Yeah.
So different sources to pull from.
It was helpful this week, especially since we kind of slightly unexpectedly had to come up with a double episode, and we decided that, hey, we actually have enough stuff. Let's give people an entire episode instead of, just an interview or whatever.
A typical out-of-town episode. Like, here's an interview. Have fun.
Yeah.
No, that's good. So keep that stuff coming. We appreciate it. And of course, I always love to see the new stories.
We're like scrambling for interviews. At this point, if somebody doesn't volunteer, there won't be an interview on the next episode. That would be bad. So
or 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from now. So
if
we need more interviews. If you have suggestions or if you want to volunteer somebody, or if you can drag somebody kicking and screaming to one, we'll take that.
Cajole people, trick them, whatever it takes.
Right? That works. That works. So as we wrap up, of course, we'll look forward to seeing you same time next week. We'll have another full episode for you and hope you enjoy.